Right, please take up your seats. Thank you.
Uh, Ladies and gentlemen, yeah, I just wanted to welcome you to Oricon. As Harry indicated, my name is Stefan Jooste. I lead our advisory business in Africa, and we are very proud to be a partner of the Transport Forum and to host you here at our facilities. We've got a culture starting with a safety moment. Now, I did contemplate, looking at the nature of the debates that we've got today, that there might be some sort of safety issue with some of those, but I won't go down that road. And I'd rather just say that in the event of an emergency, there will be a siren and there will be safety wardens to escort you out of this room, and we'll go out through the front door to just a place outside. So you will, in the event of that unlikely event happening, please just follow the direction of the safety wardens. Other than that, I think most of you hopefully have found the toilets by now, but if you have not, it is just out of the room here, past where we had some snacks, and just around the corner are our toilets. So thank you very much. It's our pleasure to welcome you here. We hope we will all have very constructive debates today. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. We really appreciate you hosting us here today. And obviously, our prime sponsor today is ETC. Welcome to all the online viewers. Just for record, it's the 18th of April 2019. It's a transport forum addressing road funding in South Africa. What is the solution? The fourth event in a series of 4 addressing. Maybe while we're waiting for this to be fixed, I was trying to follow there, but clearly she's much more technical than myself. I wouldn't have a clue to do it again. I want to ask Kuni to come to the front and just do the official welcome on behalf of ETC. Thank you, Kuni.
Thank you, Harry. Is it on? Can you hear me? Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you very much, Harry, for arranging this forum for us today, as well as Oricon making the facility available. We are highly appreciative of this. I think the biggest question that most people ask is, why are we doing this? Why are we having these conferences? This is number 4 in a series of 4. And I think the starting point of this would be to create a bit of context. Engineering News via Bloomberg carried an article yesterday. The article indicated that South Africa has shown the biggest decline in the last 12 years of any country in the world in terms of economic, social performance than any other country in the world that's not at war. That means we have gone even and surpassed countries like even Zimbabwe. Why is it important? Because I think what's really needed at this point in time is for us to start working around solutions. We as South Africa need to start understanding that we've had decline, but we have to actually start working on finding solutions to our own problems. These problems are socioeconomic, these problems are political, and this is why we're having this conversation. We're having this conversation to invite people to say, what are possible solutions? If tolling is not the only solution, what are other funding solutions? We understand that if we create infrastructure, we then assist economic investment and economic growth. And I think we as South Africans, and we sitting around the table today here, are probably part of the most influential people, business people in South Africa, that are able to actually find solutions, that are actually able to contribute and assist us in finding solutions for our funding needs and for our infrastructure needs. So from my side, welcome. I'm sure you're looking forward to the day, and I'm also really looking forward to your insights and contributions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Connie. We're looking forward and spending the time with ETC today. All right, so as we go along, I'll understand better what's happening to us. Great. Ladies and gents, we also privileged in having Dr. Ismail Wadi here with us today, the MSc for Roads and Transport, Gauteng Provincial Government, and he's going to say a few words. Thank you very much, MSc.
Good morning everybody. Thank you very much, Harry, for the invitation and also for giving me an opportunity to say a few words. In a sense, I did indicate to Harry that this will probably be the last time that I speak at the Transport Forum. Elections are coming up on the 8th of May, and I think that it's very clear that I will not be coming back to this particular portfolio after the 8th of May. I've been in this post for 8.5 years now, and I think it's time for change. You can't stay in one political portfolio for much longer. So it's good. I'm looking forward to the change. And also, I think I'm also here just to express my sincere gratitude for the very, very strong relationship and partnership that we've built with the Transport Forum. These platforms are absolutely important in generating ideas, in getting clarity on issues, in debating hot topics, controversial issues, where there's discordance and divergence of views. And I think the Transport Forum has always provided that platform where people in a more calmer sort of environment or atmosphere can debate, can discuss, can challenge one another on a number of key issues. From our side, I'm hoping that this relationship will remain with the Department of Roads and Transport in Gauteng, with the Gauteng Management Agency. But the reality is that there are going to be political changes, and hopefully in a not too distant future you will invite the new MEC for Roads and Transport in Gauteng to participate on this platform. And thank you very much for the very cordial relationship, Harry, and for the support you've given our department. I've been asked to say a few words about the Gauteng Transport Authority. Um, those who've been monitoring or following the work of our department, you know that really since 2013, we've been toying with the idea of establishing a fully fledged province-wide transport authority which will incorporate elements of the 3 metropolitan municipalities and the 2 district municipalities and the the Gauteng Department of Transport at a provincial level. If one looks at our constitution, the schedule at the end of the constitution allocates certain powers and functions to provinces and to municipal authorities. And you will see that transport is what we call a concurrent power or function. It's distributed nationally, provincially, and at a local level. And very often we don't get the coordination right. We don't get agreements, even at technical level sometimes with municipalities. And now that you have different political players administering certain municipalities, sometimes there are political differences. And to get coordination, particularly around transport planning, can become quite a difficult exercise. So in a province such as ours, which is a city-region complex, we have 3 large metropolitan municipalities contiguous to one another. It's very important that we get an institutional mechanism, an administrative platform for higher level coordination of transport planning, transport policy making, and coordination of transport affairs in our province. Otherwise, province might be moving in one direction and big metros might be moving in another direction, and you have a divergence of planning and purposes, and I think we might pick up serious problems in terms of the future of the transport system. So more and more we have to talk about the Gauteng city region as a regional complex, and more higher levels of integrated planning is needed. Now just very quickly in terms of the department itself, we do have a number of key focal areas over the next few years. Of course, we are seriously concerned about expanding the transport corridors and nodes in the city region. We have an imbalance in different municipal areas or regions. If you take the Citibank region or the West End region, the district municipalities, there's very little actually in the way of public transport. There might be a few bus routes that the province subsidizes, and then it's really taxi operations, and in some segments you have metro rail with all its problems and challenges. So there's no real public transport system that we can talk about in the district municipalities. And in the metros over the last few years, I mean, we've been talking about the BRT systems, and there's a very high level of unevenness in terms of the implementation of the actual infrastructure and the management and coordination of the services. So those become very critical in terms of the provision of public transport. At the level of integrated fare management, some work has happened, there's been some progress, but we still can't talk about one ticket that can be used across all modes of transport in Gauteng. Yes, we're now at a point where the Gautrain ticket can be used onto the Via Vaya or the BRT systems and vice versa. Some amount of development work and back office work has happened, but we can't really talk about an integrated ticketing system or fare management system. There's new technological innovations that are springing upon us every now and then, and transport has to keep pace with that. And increasingly, I mean, if you look at the developed world, there's talk of mobility as a service. We're not even there in terms of the concept. So there's a lot of work that we've got to do in that particular area. And then is the integration of the rail services or rail functions in our province. It's not desirable that we have metro rail system running on one track, which is an old track, and you have the Gautrain system, which is a more modern and a more up-to-date system. And you have this massive imbalances, and of course the very unfortunate incident a few weeks ago where the president and the premier were sitting on a metro rail track for 3 hours because the train couldn't move. You can't have a public transport system like that in the Gauteng city region if you want to have the cutting edge if you want to be economically competitive, etc. So there's a lot of work that the next administration will have to do around integrating the rail system and network in our province. And the draft white paper on rail, it's a pity that this administration was not able to finalize it and define it as policy. So hopefully very early in the next administration, that will become the new policy framework, and then we can begin to look at the whole question of devolution and integration. What we are really talking about today is this concept of the Gauteng Transport Authority. As I said, it's a new institutional mechanism or architecture that we want to establish over the next few years to get this higher levels of coordination and integration within the province. In terms of the immediate tasks, I think some of the people here who've been following this work, the legislature has now formally approved the Gauteng Transport Authority bill. It was passed in the last session of the Gauteng legislature on the 29th of March. All that remains now is for the Premier to assent to the bill and to promulgate it. And then the first major exercise is to establish the juristic entity, the Gauteng Transport Authority, and for it to be a legal authority from a financial management point of view, we have to register it as a Schedule 3C public entity with National Treasury. So there's a fair amount of technical work that will have to be done, but it's absolutely important that it gets done this year so that the legalities of it in terms of the payments and the management of finances, etc., is properly managed. Of course, we will have to begin the process of getting a budget allocation. The budget has been approved. There isn't a substantial sum that has been voted for the Transport Authority, so we'll have to look at that. And then some core staff will have to be employed or appointed in the short term to get the Transport Authority running. Now, you'll remember we had an international conference 3 or 4 years ago to discuss this concept. This is really the end result of that process, and to get the negotiations and the delicate balance between the province and the municipalities, the distribution of functions and powers, is really what we had to manage very carefully, and I think we finally got it right. We've taken a policy decision, and the Premier has agreed to this, that Mr. Jack van der Merwe, the CEO of the Gauteng Management Agency, in the short term will steer the process of establishing, or will assist the process of establishing the Gauteng Transport Authority. So I can say from today, the Premier has already signed his papers, so he officially can start work today with regards to the practicalities of establishing the Gauteng Transport Authority. In terms of the Act, the objects or the purpose of such an authority is to establish and to empower the authority to give effect to the constitutional provisions and the management and coordination of national transport policy and law within our province, and to begin to see where there are duplications of functions. Can we better coordinate those things? So a very practical example. In the province, we subsidize 34 bus contracts. But then we have Metro Bus, you have the Tshwane Bus Service Company, which is over 100 years old. You have a bus company operating in Ekurhuleni. And then you have the BRT systems. All of them have different contracting modalities. There are different standards. Norms and standards are not uniform. So an authority such as this can begin to coordinate that function, establish the norms and standards across the province as a whole, and to begin to see whether we can't eliminate the duplication that is there and the better use of our resources in terms of money is allocated for bus services in our province. Integrate the transport system in the province. I think most of you are familiar. There's a fragmented public transport system in the province, distributed between the province and nationally in terms of rail, province, bus subsidies and Gautrain, and then the municipal authorities. Can we get better integration of that system to foster cooperation and coordination between different public transport authorities? We've had this interim measure called the Gauteng Transport Commission, a voluntary agreement with the parties, with the municipalities, to try and get better coordination. But I think we've learned that really the ideal situation is to have the power of law, the force of law, to actually allow for that cooperation to be strengthened. And then to improve and optimize the planning and implementation of public transport services in our province. and then, as I said, indicated to rationalize certain functions and to make better use of the funding resource, the fiscal resources that we have for public transport. In terms of the broad sort of functions of the authority, is to undertake strategic and integrated transport planning. Now, this is the key really for the future of transport in our province. Each authority is planning inwardly. So Joburg plans, it has its integrated transport plan for the city of Johannesburg. But if you look at the research we've done through the Gauteng Household Transport Survey, the 2014 survey, and we've just now embarking on the next survey now for 2019, you will see that on a day-to-day basis, there's a very, very high level of movement of people from one municipality to the other for work purposes and coming back home. The most important corridor is really between Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni, and is the Germiston-Johannesburg corridor, where we have the highest level of movement of people. So you can't have a city planning its transport services just for that city, because thousands of people literally are moving outside of your city, going to work and coming back. And nobody plans for that. Each city is inwardly looking. So I think to get that strategic perspective, the overall sort of movements of people, etc., and then to begin to plan a system which takes into account the actual movements of people, the actual point of origin and destination, is something that I think we're going to have to work through. And at the moment, as I said, we are planning largely in silos, and we've got to get that right. To promote the development of an integrated and accessible public transport network, again, it's a similar point that we've made early on. To begin to regulate the whole issue of transport fares or fees, charges that are there. If you use multiple modes of transport, public transport, do you qualify for a discount? How do you manage that? So if I use Gautrain and I use Via Vaya on the same day in one trip, because I'm using a second mode of public transport, will I get a discount in terms of the charge that's there? At the moment, you pay for what is there and you pay for what is there on this side. You're not getting the overall benefits in terms of the fare management system. We've got to secure the passenger transport services, the transport infrastructure, integrated ticketing information, passenger information. Again, each service operator, provider has its own schedule, own times, etc. There's no correlation to see whether there's a seamless movement from one to the other. All of those things have to be sorted out and managed in an integrated kind of way. And then we've got to get proper travel demand management within our system, single transport insignia or branding. Every municipality has got its own colors. Even in Joburg, Metrobus has got one color, Via Vaya has got another color. You don't get a sense in your subconsciousness that there's a single public transport system in this province. And branding is a very key part of that. So I think that's really can we begin to develop within the consciousness of public transport officials across the board and the public at large, that we have one public transport service or network servicing the people of Gauteng across boundaries. That concept has not fully been developed. So collection of statistical data and information. Again, if we're looking at data analytics, the fourth industrial revolution, how do we collect all the information in a systematic way on a day-to-day basis across different operators so that we can make better use of the material, the information, the evidence that is there for transport planning purposes. So I think this spells out in broad sort of ballpark, in a bold way what the different functions are. The Transport Authority will have to establish or develop a strategic transport plan, and this has to take into account existing national plans, provincial plans, and also the different transport plans of the various municipalities. And this is going to be one of the key tasks if you really want to get the Transport Authority functioning very swiftly over the next year. You're going to have to get this plan in place as soon as possible. The law, the Act makes it a legal obligation for the authority to consult widely on all of its work, but certain key stakeholders such as PRASA, EXA, Sanwal, SALGA will have to be consulted, the Gauteng Management Agency, the municipalities, and then the various private transport operators will have to be drawn into the process of planning, etc. What's the proposed structure? It looks a bit dense, but the Transport Authority is really a lean structure. There's a board of directors with a CEO that will report at a political level to the Premier's Coordinating Forum. The Premier's Coordinating Forum is the Premier and all the mayors of the 11 municipalities in our province. Alongside them will be the mayoral committees of the various municipalities and of course the Gauteng Executive Council. So that's the political structure at the top. And then the board of directors will over time develop a panel of experts for advisory work and support. And then there's a stakeholders forum that will have to be created or established involving all transport stakeholders in the province. And then the specific functions are indicated there. We don't envisage this to be a big, large bureaucracy. It really has to be a streamlined agency or authority with high-level skills. And it's a technical structure. It is not a structure of political office bearers. I think it's important to get that right. You'll see later on, even in terms of the composition of the board. We don't want to pack that up with the MEC and the members of the mayoral committees so that it's a political, no. It's a technical administrative unit with high quality or high levels of expertise that can do the technical work in terms of transport policy making or defining the policy and transport planning. The board will be, or the board of directors will be made up of 13 persons. 6 are the CEO is ex officio, 6 representatives from the provincial and municipal government. So it's the 3 metros, the 2 district municipalities, and the MEC's office. We've indicated to the municipalities that we don't want political office bearers necessarily to serve on this. If a municipality chooses to appoint a political office bearer onto this board, it's fine. But I think our broad guidelines that we want to issue is that it has to be people with technical capacity and capability. Otherwise, it just becomes a political platform for politicizing transport issues, which won't take us forward, actually. And the experience, I mean, we've looked at transport authorities in other parts of the world. From the international studies we've done, from the visits we've made to different parts of the world, we've realized that the best way forward is to keep this as a technical structure with expertise. And then there will be 6 persons who will be appointed onto this board based on their expertise. So it's transport planning, transport infrastructure development, road and rail-based transport operations, transport economics, intelligent transport systems, non-motorized transport, and then the normal things that goes with corporate governance, legal, financial, and HR management. So that's how it's conceptualized. 6 people from government structures and 6 people for their technical expertise who will constitute the board of management. What would be the other key responsibilities in the short term that we'll have to start managing very quickly with the Department of Roads and Transport? The Transport Authority will have to partner with the department to review the 25-year integrated transport management master plan. I've indicated on other platforms a few weeks ago that yes, there's still a lot of sections in the ITMP 25 that's valid, that's still relevant, but clearly certain sections require review because it's almost outdated. That's how dynamic transport sector is. And there are new issues like the 4th Industrial Revolution and transport. The ITMP 25 doesn't necessarily talk to that. So that kind of review will have to be done quite soon. We've got to update the transport demand model, what they call the ME4 model. We've done that last in preparation for the ITMP 25. It's a bit outdated already. So that technical work will have to be done. And then of course, the consultations with all the major stakeholders, particularly outside of government, to get the forum established. We'll have to talk about who from the department, core staff, will move over to the new transport authority, who from the municipalities could possibly be seconded to the new transport authority so that you have a pool of skills and technical capability that can really get the transport authority up and running and then what additional capacity needs to be developed. I'm not going to go through this. I think this is at a practical level, some of the functional areas that the authority will have to start looking at. So just very broadly, it's to get the common vision going, to get the skills in place, to start harmonizing all the transport plans of the municipalities, the transport network plans, the IDPs, to serve as an advisory service to the provincial regulatory entity, which is the licensing authority, to update your transport model, and to do stakeholder management. I mean, those are quite a bit of tasks there already. In terms of the integrated public transport operations, is to begin to establish wider commuter forums in the province, to start doing more detailed work around the IFS and the e-ticketing system and the fare harmonization, to look at issues of transfers, modal transfers, where there are big gaps in the whole system, the common branding, and of course the marketing and communication. Critical area of weakness in everything that we do at the moment in transport is traffic enforcement or transport enforcement. It's completely fragmented. It's largely this municipal traffic police. It's not really a coordinated system. And it tends to be more linked to crime combating and that kind of thing rather than traffic operations and enforcement of traffic laws and regulations. And I think we need to get that balance right. So JMPD, for example, is more involved on a day-to-day basis with community protests, for example. All the go there if something happens in their community. But that's not really their core function. Who's doing the law enforcement in terms of road traffic management? And I think there are critical weaknesses there that we need to begin to get that. So to develop that capability, that coordination, etc., needs to be sorted out. And then there's the whole issue of the norms and standards and the whole contracting side of things. As I indicated early on, there are draft norms and standards that have been prepared by the department some years ago, but they just haven't been brought to finality. So to get all of the norms and standards around key areas to sort that out, and then how do you manage your capital infrastructure budgets? Each one is doing different things. We're really not sitting down and saying, look, what's the key priorities for the city region? Can we begin to invest year rather than year? We don't need this fragmented approach. And then there's always a shortage for funding, and that's going to be a key part of your discussions later on. How do we get more resources for public transport infrastructure or for transport infrastructure more broadly? So I think really from my side, it's been a great pleasure to work with the team here, and I'm hoping that my departure will not signal the breakdown in the relationship, but rather the further strengthening of this partnership. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, MEC. Surely you've been one of the best MECs I've worked for.
I hope so.
Continuity is usually a problem or a concern should somebody move on, but you certainly set high standards. So we're really concerned about should the next person be able to pick up to the high standards you've set. So thank you very much from the industry. We really appreciate you being a servant to the industry and all the vision that you've given us. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Ladies and gents, we'll allow 2 questions, short questions to the MEC. I can see there's one. Kindly identify yourself, and I'll make my way to you with the mic and the camera.
My name is Adrian Brislin. I'm a consulting engineer. Mr. Vale, I just wanted to ask, with GTA, is part of the ambit to regulate the taxi industry? Because without regulation, we're facing a war between these people and other public transport operators.
This is the last question.
Good morning. My name is Mposha Kong. I'm representing myself, rather, as an industry participant. Sorry. I just have 2 questions, MEC. With regards to the establishment of the Transport Authority, congratulations on the progress done thus far. How do we envisage this, the allocation of funds that would have been collected through fare collection? Have we gotten to a stage where we've outlined the process with regards to how will that be distributed across the service providers? And then my last one is, with regards to the Gautrain, you mentioned earlier that the Gautrain ticket would be used on the Rea Vaya. Has this been implemented, or are we still fine-tuning the process? Thank you.
Okay, I think two important questions. Will there be regulation of the taxi industry? There is a degree of regulation already. It's not that the taxi industry is not regulated at all. So there is a licensing regime that is in place. And in Gauteng, I would say that at least about 45 to 50,000 taxis are licensed, are operating. The big problem is that we have a body of people or operators who are not licensed, who are operating illegally or unlawfully. And this is done sometimes with the instigation of the leadership of various taxi organizations. And then the fights are really about internal struggles or inter-organizational struggles, which is resulting in the violence. So I think what is clear is that the degree of regulation is inadequate, and perhaps, you know, what was introduced in the early years of the new government post 1994, we will have to review that much more carefully. I agree that there's a need for more stringent regulation, particularly of the taxi industry. But linked to that is the point I made earlier on, is just inadequate enforcement of what is there. Okay, so you'll see a taxi driver willfully breaking the law, driving against oncoming traffic. And nobody will do anything about it. Now that's an enforcement part. That's the job of the traffic police. It's not the job of the officials from our department. We don't have that capability and capacity. So I think that's the one problem. The other structural problem that we have is the Gauteng Traffic Police. Initially, when it was established, it was located within the Gauteng Department of Roads and Transport. For the last 10 years, it has moved to community safety. So physically, it is now located. It carries out the functions in terms of the Road Traffic Act, but its location is in community safety. And that's why it has a stronger leaning towards policing responsibilities rather than road traffic management responsibilities. And I think that's an area that will have to be looked at by the new administration. We've been debating this. I mean, we've got a very good relationship with the MEC for Community Safety. There's no turf wars or turf battles between the two of us. But I think one has to look at the functionality part of it, and whether, if you want a kind of an auxiliary force or service to the police services, that's fine. But then maybe we need to create a transport inspectorate that deals with transport matters, that does the monitoring of the operating licenses, particularly taxi operations, bus operations, etc. You need an inspectorate to see whether there's compliance, roadworthy certificates, all of those kinds of things. So I think the deficiencies is not so much in the regulation side. We can beef that up. It's more on the operations and the implementation. That's my own sort of assessment of where we are at the moment. And that will apply even for example, the way bridges. We do have, Jack, I think 18 way bridges in Gauteng. Most of them are not operational. But you need a traffic officer to be there, to issue the fines, to do the practical work. And that's not actually happening. So I think that's really the problem that we're experiencing. In terms of the integrated fare management, yes, I think at a technical level we have made an advance. There have been some significant technical work that has happened. We've got a forum with the BRT people in the different municipalities to look at standards, to get common standards, etc. That work can be speeded up. But the bigger issue is who manages the funds, the banking system, the back office work, okay? And that only the Transport Authority. I mean, the global practice that we see is the Transport Authority acts as the back office for the fare management system. So every day, when you swipe your VI ticket and it charges you 10 and 50, that money must come to some place. At the moment, it goes into the bank account of the city. But that should come to the authority as the custodian of all the revenue collected, say from public transport. And then thereafter, the authority has to redistribute it, either on a daily basis or on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis. So if you take Istanbul, for example, they do have a very highly coordinated public transport system, from ferries to buses, to trams, to BRT systems, etc., rail systems. It's one ticket, and it's the Istanbul Transport Authority that actually allocates that, and they do it on a monthly basis. So there's high levels of trust in the system, fairness in the system. There's no feeling that, look, somebody will take our money and use it for something else and will be shortchanged. There's trust in the system. And that's why we need a highly technical structure with capability and with integrity, so that all the operators feel comfortable that the money is safe. So at the moment, the province has got its own bank of choice. Each city has got its own bank of choice. Now, to integrate that, you can't have different banks doing all of those kinds of things. And then there's one little question which is always needling: bank charges. Right? For every transaction, when you swipe your card for you to board a bus or a train, who's going to cover the cost of that? Okay, because as it is, public transport is quite expensive in our province already. It's really outside of the reach of many poor people. And if you have this card with bank charges and all of those things, so all of those things have to be negotiated. And it's really the authority that will have that overarching strength, I would hope so, to begin to play that kind of role. And then the fare harmonization, right? So that if you do multiple trips, what's the cost of your total cost for transport per day using different modes? Is that affordable? That's another important question that we will have to look at very carefully, because I think the issue of affordability is a very big issue in Gauteng. So people can't afford Gautrain, but then because of the sheer economic circumstances, they're forced to use the metro rail. And what's equal about that? What's fair about that? Because it's inherently discriminatory against the poor, simply because of the uneven fare structures. So I think there are very big policy questions and also questions of financial planning, which the Transport Authority will have to resolve over the next few years. Was there a second question? I might have missed it. Oh, okay. Today you can do it, right? You can do it, but don't try it, because they worried where the money will go to, right? Technically, we can do that. We've tested it, we've piloted it. So at least for two modes of government-controlled public transport services, or under the auspices of government, you can use those tickets. But remember, it's a question of what is your wallet. If you're using 20 trips for Via Via, you know your transport cost for the month is X amount. If you suddenly use that ticket now for a Gautrain trip, and it's a fairly long trip, then 50 rands gets wiped out of that wallet. Okay, and you must be clear that it's 50 rands gone. It's gone out of your monthly traveling. So I think even the education for the public, the commuters at large, of what is this wallet and what that can buy in terms of services, a lot of public education will have to take place. It's not just that you can take a card and start swiping, and then next thing in a week the money is gone. There's one last issue that we will have to look at, and it's again a bigger issue. Financial and fiscal, the Competition Commission is doing a market review of subsidization of public transport services in the country. What is good about that is that it's a comprehensive review looking at all modes of public transport. So the big cry has really been from the taxi industry that they're not getting the subsidies. But the key question is, an e-ticket can be absolutely a very powerful tool to support that subsidization. So you don't subsidize an operator per se, you can subsidize an individual. So if you have a transport ticket, an e-ticket, government can load on as your subsidy for the month, let's say 50 rands a month. Student, old age, people on grants, whatever the criteria whatever the criteria are, right? So you can get that thing loaded onto your ticket without actually government giving you every month physically to go and collect the transport voucher. So I think that there's an important innovation, and it's a policy matter that will have to be looked at very carefully. And we're all eagerly awaiting the report. We were hoping to get the report like in this quarter, but it's quite clear that it's not going to be possible. So let's see what the recommendations are. My guess is that it's going to be subsidy to an individual citizen rather to an operator, and one will have to begin to factor those things into the future planning of the transport system. Harry, thank you very much, and thank you to everybody.
Thank you, ABC. Right. A lot of wisdom from the MEC. I think the concept of rather subsidizing commuter, I think, is quite a wise one. Ladies and gents, just let me get our program up quickly. Right, just a confirmation. The presentations you see here today will be uploaded to the Transport Forum's website. Complimentary, you'll be able to download them from tomorrow. It will be available from this website. You need to log in as a user, obviously protecting our infrastructure. So you log in as a user, I get your email, I can then send you emails again, Thank you for allowing me in your inbox weekly. And then you'll be able to go to the downloads feature on this website. Before that, you log in. Should you not have a user account, then you'll see under users menu, there's a sign up function. All this guidance is on the website. You sign up. It's a little simple process. You sign up as a user with the Transport Forum, and then you log in. And once you've logged in, then you select the downloads feature on the website, and you should be able to use a little search engine. Search engine, you can either type in a person's name or a date's name in a search field to bring up the presentations, or you can go to category and you can select today's date, and it'll bring up all the presentations presented today, and you can download them complimentary. So that is as simple as that. Ladies and gents, at the end of the day, there's a lucky draw there on the table. It's a wireless speaker, very nice device. So you might be the lucky winner of one of these. Obviously, the winner must be present. So there's a carrot for you to be here till the end. But I doubt whether any one of you would like to leave before the end anyway. So without further ado then, I would like to hand you gladly over to Mr. Mike Schuessler, who's going to do the moderation of the rest of the event. He's also going to do his first presentation, and then he'll take over the moderation from me for the day. Thank you very much, Mike.
I've got my work cut out today, I think. As a moderator, not so much on the presentation side. But I think I'm going to give you a bit of my perspective, what I learned in the last 3 presentations, and a little bit of my findings on the road funding side, if you look at it. And then I'm going to just give you an idea right at the end of what the mix will probably have to be. But first of all, the situation that we find ourselves in this country is very strange. We keep on hearing how poor we are, yet we have the 8th biggest pension fund assets in the world in nominal US dollar terms, as an example. We've also got a higher car ownership in most emerging markets, even China. And if you just look at while the data I only have from 97 to now, that's more than doubling of motor vehicles. And so you've gone from about 5.4 million to about 11 million at the moment. We're at 11.3 million in March. So that's a huge amount, and that's just my forecast. Whether it comes true or not is anything. Neither here nor there, but we're certainly increasing the amount of vehicles in South Africa. That's also meant we've increased the amount of fuel we buy in South Africa. So it's not a decline in fuel. These are just rounded numbers, but it gives you an idea that your fuel sales have increased with about 50%, although your cars have more than doubled. The reason being is that cars or vehicles have become more fuel efficient. If you just look at it, in 97, roughly about 3,000 liters per year per car to 2,100. So about down nearly a third, about 30% down. So it gives you an idea as to where the world's going with fuel efficiency. I tried to find, you can work out how old the car park is using e-nators and so on, but I think, the fuel will take a while, because you're still going to have cars that use the older cars for quite a while, and they continuously use that amount of fuel or more. But I do think that the fuel will fall, and some years it falls a little bit more than others because of price. People are a bit price sensitive to that. But here's a summary that I put in, and at the last point here, and that's the very simple point, I do not know how much road has changed. I don't know how much more kilometers of tar or track we added, but I don't think it's much. And I know in places like KwaZulu-Natal, for example, we now have less road, because a lot of the roads that were tarred are now gravel roads. And that's where we are. I think the other thing is just say, when I talk about fuel, I talk about the fuel for on-road vehicles. I think most of it comes through. It's pretty efficient, but there are signs of leakage, in the sense of that some are smuggled tax-free from maybe other countries near us, or not exported when they said they were exported, or maybe even, as we know, from military stock or whatever the case may be. And it also excludes paraffin, jet fuel, and marine diesel. Just what we've got to keep in mind is rail has gone nowhere vis-a-vis road, and our railways have gone, Transnet has gone basically on two routes that they're very strong on, and that is the coal line to Richards Bay from the Eastern Highveld, and then from the Northern Cape, Northwest Plateau, where the iron ore is, and then manganese down to Saldanha. The Durban route to Joburg is mainly containers, but it's very slow in comparison to road. And this is just the road by contract. So this is Stats SA data. So it would exclude, for example, the Pick and Pay owned transport. So this is just where you pay another transporter. So Gavin's here from the Road Freight Association. His guys are doing the transport on behalf of somebody else. So it's only that part. It's not the self or the people that do so on. And right now, the latest figures for December is around 80% of the goods travel by road. If you then include the OK Bazaars and the Pick and Pays and the abattoirs and so on that do their own transport, and the farmers and the like to the market, you're probably going to get close to 90% of all transport is by road. So the other thing is, obviously, we all know that, but it's just very obvious stating, we don't have a river system. Europe has a river system, America has a river system, parts of Latin America have a river system, maybe even the Congo has a river system, but we don't. So we don't have river transport as an option on the land side. Just one or two slides on the fuel side. If you go back to the middle of the last decade, you could say it was about 40 to 50, and when the petrol price was really high in the lead up to the global financial crisis, the local part of the fuel price was between 40 and 50%. When it was really high, maybe 30%, as you can see here. But now we've gone to the other way, where we're typically around 55 to 60% of the fuel price is for local stuff. And that's not just fuel taxes and the road accident fund. That's also retail margins, wholesale margins, transport costs, and so on. And that also excludes the margins that Transnet makes that is part of the and the cost insurance freight part that they've got in the basic price. So basically that would add another % or two. But those are the local factors. So today, local factors in the fuel price play a much bigger role than we're led to believe very often. And that's what I'd like to just leave that thought to you. The value of the road network, I did have a very good look, and I got a lot on the presentations here. I learned a lot about our value of our road network. I'm not saying it's a perfect valuation, because I think that's very difficult. But the Department of Transport stated that our road network was worth 2 trillion rand. I see some of that they got from SANROL, but also the municipalities and so on. And that would be the replacement cost in 2013. So by March this year, that replacement cost, just inflating it by inflation, would be about 2.75 trillion rand. That's more than half our GDP. That would make building a few power stations look small. But you've got to remember that you're probably looking at building these roads over a period of 20 years, because that's about the lifespan of a road, roughly speaking. So if you're going to replace those roads every 20 years, you're going to be about 138 billion per year that you're going to spend on it. Then I had a look at the amount of money outstanding only on SANROL. I know there's 1 or 2 metros that also have a few 100 million outstanding. But if you want to pay that off over 10 years, that's including the interest rates on it, that's about 4 billion a year that you'd have to pay off. That's on the current bonds as is. Then to grow the network, because I keep thinking, I told you about the cars getting more, but I think, you know, as you grow as a country, you get other places where people live, or businesses form, or a new mine starts, or a farm. So you'd have to grow the network. You'd probably close some of the roads too, I guess, but let's just say we grow the network at 1% a year. That's a minimum, I would say, that you can grow at if you want to grow the economy at 3 or 4% a year. So that's a 27 billion added. Went to National Treasury. They say that excluding certain local smaller subsidies, but the metros and the commuter rail is 33 billion. I'm not sure if they include Jack's train in that, but that's also another billion or two. So your total funding required, if motorists were to pay for the public transport, because in many countries that is the case, you say the motorists are the people that have choices and are richer, and you put that into public transport as well, is roughly 190 billion a year. I think the other thing I learned, and that's just a general fact, seems that we've got a much cheaper way of building roads than the Northern Hemisphere has. We don't use as much bitumen or waterproofing. Our lifespan of our roads is about 20 years. But when we use less tar and so on, it means that there has to be more maintenance on those roads. These are just facts, not figures. What we collect and spend on roads and public transport, just here from National Treasury, the latest budget, just copied and pasted. As you can see, last year we spent 44 billion on road infrastructure. I just left in water because it's also there. So you can see we spend more on roads than we do on water. But further down, you'll find that the 33 billion, sorry, it doesn't say billion there, of public transport is going to go up to 53 billion later of public transport in 2021. So public transport spending will be as big as road spending. But combine those, it's not close to the 190 billion that I've got roughly. Even if it was 170 billion, even if it's 210 billion, it's nowhere close. I'm going to talk about the municipal infrastructure in a minute, because I think it's something that we forget. But the grant of municipal infrastructure is going from 15 billion to 16.8 billion. It's not a big increase. That's what municipalities are supposed to do: roads, electricity, water, and everything with, over that same time period. A friend of mine, Charles Cox, who has Ratings Africa, released a report 2-3 days ago. I think my good friend John would know him very well too. It looks like our municipalities are in trouble. They On average, the bad municipalities have an operating loss combined of 23 billion. With the good municipalities, we still end up with 13 billion shortfall on the operating budget of municipalities. That means the municipalities have to dig into their capital budget. So they take away from the capital budget. And there's already a 23 billion capital shortfall. Not all of this is roads. But my logic is just this. The municipalities can only make their main money from selling water and electricity. Their margins there are huge. They used to be over 70%, they've come down. So where's their motivation to build roads? If they're not making money from the road, they are more likely to allocate their smaller or decreasing capital budget onto electricity and water. Would you agree with me? And sewage is another one they make money on, and probably refuge removal. But on roads, it's just an expenditure, capital expenditure item for them. And their property taxes is the one thing that they're very bad at collecting. Yes, they're bad at collecting electricity, but it's even worse on the property tax side. It really is, because they've got nothing to switch off if you don't pay your property taxes. And that's why they put all these things into one bill over time, and that's so on. But my point is that I think local government is going to be a big struggle on roads going forward. There's going to be a huge problem there. So now we get to our funding for roads. If I only took a small part of public transport and I said, right, the other 2/3 of public transport or whatever, and I exclude taxis from this, I'll put it in later, and I said, right, I don't want to sponsor from petrol the Gauteng, because that's for rich people, I decided. See, sorry, Jack, just misusing you. And I misuse him at every presentation, don't worry. And the other side, I say, right, I'm going to put a bit of money in the BRTs, but I'm not going to, or into commuter rail, but not the whole lot. So then I think you're going to look at about R7.82 per litre if you fund it only from petrol taxes. But just to put it into perspective, it's R7.50 if I look at the per litre, roughly speaking, on roads alone. If just the upkeep and the replacement alone, no growth, it's R6.18. So that gives you an idea. If I decided I'm going to subsidize the taxis by them not paying a fuel tax, and I've subsidized the rest of public transport, I could get very close, very easily, very quickly to R10 a litre. It's not a scientific one, I'm just saying it can go higher. So fuel tax alone is a very expensive option, particularly for trucks. And if you look at the cigarette industry right now, what's happened? Those taxes on smokes have gone up through the roof. And you have more and more cheating. You have a lot of mafias forming. You really do. And already we know in the trucking industry, people are stealing fuel from other trucks too. And the truck drivers sell it as a byproduct in a sense. So we're in a position here in South Africa where I think we've got to be very careful how much we put onto just petrol or fuel. Because also remember that when you've got that much transport by truck, the cost will be borne very often by consumers who don't have cars. They'll be borne by people who are in a situation. So what does the fuel levy collect? This year it'll be about 80 billion. Last year till March it was just about 71 billion. This excludes the road accident fund. Remember that road accident fund is another R1.50 a litre. So that's excluded from that R10 a litre anyway. So the other problem is that this is not just for, it goes into the general tax thing and it goes everywhere. What I am saying to you, if you read carefully through this year's budget, the fact that they only put 15 cents tax on for the fuel tax and 9 cents for the carbon tax, this excludes the carbon tax, by the way, but I'm just saying to you, what's becoming very clear to me is that the South Africa, They said they actually gave us $500 million off by increasing fuel taxes with only 15 cents. So I think they said we're going to do it at 20 cents. And I don't only think that, I know that that's been the sort of average, if you look percentage-wise, what they've been increasing it with. So the problem then is that you've got to take some of the money somewhere else. So the local authorities, as I've already said, is a big contributor to roads. That's why you pay property taxes. That's where supposedly some of the capital grants from government that goes towards local government are supposed to go. But now they're going to steal from that capital budget. So this is going to mean that we can only rely on local governments a little. I don't know how much. It's going to get some. Collecting license fees. I did a calculation. If you collect license fees on 11 million vehicles, and you just do license fees itself, you're going to have to ask quite a few thousand rand per vehicle out there on license fees. Quite a lot of few thousand rands, I think. So you're looking at 11 million, 11 billion, you get, you probably get to about 10,000, 15,000 rand per vehicle per year. Put that onto people's bill every year, that will really, okay, the bigger vehicles more and the smaller vehicles less. You'll find out very quickly how people love you. And vehicle licenses aren't collected that much. Provincial governments also can collect a fuel levy. None of them do. The metros get back part of the fuel levy in government's budget now. Western Cape did some research into it, but that idea seems to have gone somewhere else. So that leaves us, after fuel taxes and license fees and direct taxes, leaves us with tolls, which we know we don't always like. Congestion charges, as Professor Krijgsman from Stellenbosch pointed out, also that distance that he said they're doing in Namibia, where you then charge people, say, per kilometer, around a kilometer. One way I thought you could do it is you'd have a timestamp on your car, and you have to tell, everybody's got a camera these days on their phone, you have to put a timestamp on it, but people will probably cheat. But then you have to, when you get your license, show that, and then they charge you 5 rand a kilometer, or, you know, I'll be kind, I'll make it just 25 rand a kilometer, but I'm kidding you. And then municipalities will probably have to look for other ways. At the moment, they've got parking fees and stuff that they can supplement stuff with, but I don't know how much they really make from that. But you're definitely going to have to look at all of those facts, because you cannot do it by fuel alone, you cannot do it by license fees alone, you cannot do it by infrastructure grants from central government to the municipalities, especially there, but also provinces are falling short. Gauteng, for example, hasn't spent a lot on roads. So the fact of the matter is not all our eggs should be in one basket. That's basically my last slide. I'm just saying we're going to have to look at a combination, whatever that funding is going to be at the end of the day, and we cannot live without roads. It's impossible. I think we'll all agree on that. We'll have to have a combination. That combination will include fuel taxes that we have. It will include license fees, but it will probably go on, and it includes tolls already, but it's very likely in the next decade or so that we're going to see that go to congestion charges, distance charges. We already see that in other places in the world. We're going to have to find ways to manage traffic better, because that might be a better option sometimes. And part of that managing traffic better is not just synchronizing the robots and getting everything to flow more smoothly on the road, because I think that can make a big difference. But the minute you do that, then obviously your fuel consumption comes down and you get a less tax from that side, but also from managing congestion. So you would charge more to go to a CBD at 8 o'clock in the morning than you do at 12 o'clock midday. And that's all I have to say. I think I'm finished. Dr. Solomons, Salit Solomons, if you could please come up and do your presentation, and then we can move forward. I think we've basically caught everything up but 5 minutes. So if I just go here, I hope that one. Thank you.
Ladies and gents, I just want to draw your attention to the Twitter handles. Three things, e-tolls and e-toll facts. So yeah, just take note of that. You can use that, Twitter handles. Keep it there for a second. Rethink e-tolls and e-toll facts. All right. Thank you.
Mike, thank you very much. I just need to correct it. I'm no doctorate, but thanks for the promotion in any case. Yeah. But Mike has done most of my presentation. I didn't know what he's going to say, but he has done it. About a day and a bit ago, Harry called me and said, look, can you come and talk to us about this? And so I had a presentation, but there's some data that I just could not update within that point in time. So you'll see the trends in any case, which is helpful. Okay. So the question is road funding where to? And as I said, Mike has already talked about that. But to put it into context again, this is our road network. And you can see it is a huge road network spanning our country from point A to point B, be it east or west or north or south. And it's a network to be proud of, but similarly, it's a network that needs serious maintenance to keep it in the shape that we would like it to be. And again, this has also been shown previously, but it's the 10th largest network in the world. And our GDP doesn't come close to it. And so again, we need to box clever as to how do we maintain this fantastic asset. But the issue is on road funding. And if we look at our road network, most of the, call it the drama, sits in the urban road space network. And there's a particular reason for that. And we don't want it to look like this. And because we don't want our roads to look like this, we've got to really think about how we're going to fund the upkeep and the provision of new roads into the future. But let's look at our strategic network, and you'll see the red clusters. It is, of course, Gauteng, Cape Town, Durban, Port Elizabeth, and so on. Yeah. And herein sits the challenge for us. The challenge is the issue around this urbanization. And it's not only for roads, it is for most infrastructure. How are we going to provide infrastructure for most of the citizens that live in such a small space in our country? And you can see the trends, and it's been mentioned before, we are getting close to about 2/3 of the population living in the cities. Again, a more graphic, I guess, just a pictorial view on what urbanization has done over the last couple of years, and there's been a crossover in around about the middle 80s. But here stands the challenge for us. Because in the urban space, if one just looks at roads, the piece of road between Joburg and Durban, or Joburg and Pretoria as an example, more so, that gets utilized at a rate that it hasn't been done in the past. The amount of axles that get loaded onto that piece of road just gets, every year, just increased exponentially. Now, a road, its usage has got a lifespan in terms of years, but also, more so, in terms of the number of axles that traverse that section of roads on a daily basis. And because of that, one is going to find clever solutions about not only how do you maintain it, but how do you fund the maintenance of that piece of asset. No doubt, roads provide us with what we need from a mobility point of view, to all the accesses to services that we so desire. And the road levy, in the past, when it was established in the early part of last century, played its role, because at that stage we had connectivity as the issue, connecting South Africa. We have a different paradigm, and that paradigm is called urbanization. And how do we fund the mobility, particularly for roads in that urban space. Quite a different thought process has got to go around this. Here we've got some information from TomTom, and you can see the history between the travel time history between Joburg and Pretoria. There was a decrease with the GFIP, the first phase of the GFIP. There was a decrease in travel time, and you can see the uptick. That is 2016. It's now 2019, and that would have increased. And again, the N1 between Joburg and Pretoria is becoming a bit of a parking lot during peak times. It's not sustainable. One can't expand that piece of road forever and a day. One's going to find some different solutions as how you're going to manage the traffic to enable a reasonable amount of traffic flow within that road. This is another view of it, but the bottom paragraph is the most important one. It compares Joburg, Durban, Cape Town over a period of time, 2008 to 2015. And again, it says, one can see the impact of GFIP in this graph here. And there was going to be a GFIP 2 and 3, but because there were no funding to enable that to happen, one sits again with that same uptick and level of congestion, because there are no funding to be able to provide us with the means to get these projects underway. And we sit with this dilemma: how are we going to move forward? This is the roads budget, and it's already been shown before, but the bottom line is here. We need, just for the backlog, about an additional 40 billion rand. The table that you see there talks about the income and the allocation. And again, the question is, do we have the correct funding model for us? I believe the mic is dead. Sorry. Okay. If one looks at the fuel levy revenue, and this is have been decreasing the share of tax GDP. And this is till 2014-15, but the trend is important. And you can see that that is indeed the case. The reason why, and Mike has touched on it, but this is probably why. Well, this is probably why. This is one of the reasons why. In this graph where you see on the right-hand side, you'll see VMT growth. That's vehicle miles travel. That's the vehicle miles travel, the number of vehicles on a particular piece of road, the increase in mileage, which means the increase in usage. But you'll see the revenue coming down because of the fuel efficiency, which is the other side of the coin. And I've shown you some beautiful pictures of cars that some of us loved and probably still love. But that's just the case. What has happened with those vehicles over the period of time, they've just become super fuel efficient. And to emphasize that point, this is information from the International Council for Clean Transport. And you can see in China, from 2014 to 2020, the annual rate, fuel efficiency increased 5.9%. The US 3.2, and the EU 3.8. And no doubt you have more vehicles, but understand that that vehicle is using the same amount of road, but paying less over the period of time. And so the challenge that we sit with. So look at our current source of funding. Who pays what? If you've got an old car, and it does about 11 liters per 100 K, then you will pay to travel 100 kilometers, 37 Rand. A new car, about 20 Rand. Hybrid, 2, and if you've got an electric vehicle, zips. So from a tax point of view, it is not fair. The poor pay the same rate of tax as those that can afford it. It is not equitable, because the more fuel-efficient vehicle, those that can afford the more fuel-efficient vehicles are paying less than those that can't. So it's a crazy situation where those that are not well off are in actual fact subsidizing those that are somewhat well off. It is not transparent. If one gets into a car, you really don't know, if I'm going to travel from here to Joburg, what would it cost me to use this piece of road? You can calculate it, but every time you've got to do this. So there's no conscious decision that I'm going to travel the distance and I'm going to pay X. Like I'm using water, I'm using my cell phone, I know I've got a tariff. It's just not visible. And that's why it can't be used as a tool for change to influence behavior. One needs to know that if I'm going to travel and use this piece of road, it's going to cost me X, Y, and Z. And then informed decisions are made on travel patterns. And of course, it does not consider the damage caused by the mass of the vehicle. The bottom graph in color is what somewhat New Zealand's going to. And they're talking about a road user charge. So what are the elements that make up a road user charge? It's the road space, and that's in orange, the mass of the vehicle or weight, the road wear of the axles, a common issue in terms of administration, and then the VAT component. And you can see the various class of vehicles, kind of a scale as to what contribution they would pay to travel over a certain distance. This is from a University of Stellenbosch student. And this is just saying the total number of vehicles was about 11 million, and Mike mentioned that. And we will grow to 20, we will grow to 17, 18 million vehicles by 2038, 2.8% per annum. It is a serious issue for us because just alone the parking space, we need about 7,500 hectares of this. Never mind the road space. How are we going to manage this? It's a challenge, it's coming, and it needs different kinds of management. This is just something that sometimes float completely over our heads. This is from the road, from RTMC. And this is the cost of accidents in 2017. And the number you see there, 142.95, it's not million, it's billion rand. And we don't see this number, but that's what it cost us. Fatalities is around 14,000 people per year. Unbelievable. But we see it in individual pockets, and as such, it doesn't hit us at one stage. We've got to do better than what we're currently doing on this space. But look at the number, 143 billion rand. If we get half of that for roads, we would make a significant difference. But this area is within all our ability, in all our control. We can do something about it. Oh gosh, something happened. Now just a bit about what's happening in London. The first traffic light, 1868, a gas light. But something happened, and of course it got knocked off, and so that started the whole traffic control system. Okay. But in 2003, those that have been in London knows it's very congested. So they introduced a congestion charging zone. It worked well. It reduced traffic by about 25% initially. But what's currently happening, the guys got clever, and so you get the Ubers and the delivery vehicles, they're staying in the zone. They're not going out of the zone. And so more and more are staying in the zone because it's a very blunt instrument. It's not dynamic. It doesn't measure where you go and where you come from. It just measures one area of entrance and exit. And so the congestion zone is an answer, but it's not the complete answer. Traffic management solutions. Many parts of the world, they're now approaching this very differently. They're raising tariffs on when, how, and much, and where drivers used. Stellenbosch University has got a pilot project on the go. I was part of the pilot for 2 weeks. They come and they put a little dongle in your car. It's about a matchbox size. And they track where you go. And they send you a bill on a weekly basis. And it says, this is the distance of travel. These are the roads you're on. And if the tariff for that road is X, Y, Z, we multiply it. And here's your bill. Not only that, they add a emissions charge to it as well. Just for the sake of it, they can. Because they know what kind of vehicle you drive. Okay. So it's imminently possible. Road user charge, it deals with these elements. Pollution, productivity, and all the issues that needs to be addressed goes into this. But this is what many parts of the world are looking at. And so if we look at the situation that we find ourselves in, the imminent introduction of electric vehicles, the fuel efficiency of vehicles, there needs to be a change. So the traditional taxes are in danger. And so something has got to happen. Legislation that brings about a policy that enables different mechanisms of raising tariffs doesn't happen within 2-3 years. It takes years to get it into place. And so we've got to start now to do that. EVs. In London, of course, there's a kind of a subsidy if you buy a fuel vehicle, electric vehicle. But you can see the penetration every year climbs as to, first of all, it was around about 15% by the year 2030. Now it's moved up to well over 25%. And every time this kind of penetration climbs, because there's such a drive to get hold and to control the emissions better, particularly in the big consuming countries like China, as an example, that it's escalating at quite a rapid rate. And so this coming down the line will also hit us, because we are technology takers in South Africa. we don't necessarily create it. We bring technology from Europe and elsewhere, and so that technology is going to be kind of enforced on us to use going forward. So the way forward: scrap duties levies on fuel and ownership, replaced with a road user charge, ideally, and it will take into consideration the mile per charge or kilometer per charge on a car's weight, and take into consideration weight and emissions, and also congestion charges. It would upset some people, but when the congestion zone was introduced initially, it was also so, but people could see the benefit, and I guess that's the issue. Once the benefit is there, one realizes that the change was good. So Singapore, it's a fantastic place to visit. It's a small island, but my goodness, do they control this critically? You go into the city center during peak hours and you pay. Out of peak hours, hardly anything happens. It's not a problem at all. They introduced a paper system, then a digital system. Now they have a dynamic, by 2020, a dynamic system, which means they track you where you are, in and out, and that's the way they're going to go. But fortunately for them, they're an island. You know, you can't escape it. You're a bit fussed there, I guess. And so the conclusion: introducing a road user charge is possible, but for that we need a road fund. But for that we need an administration that can deal with the allocation appropriately, that can come back and audit and report on the allocations, but be accountable and transparent. And if that's the case, I don't think any of us will have an issue with it. But we need an independent transport regulator that will set the tariffs for us, whatever the charge or tariff might be. But for the time being, all governments, they're proceeding a bit cautiously, but they will have to do something about it as fuel tax run dry. Ladies and gentlemen, that's my story. Thank you for your time.
I'd like to call Terry Markman up from the Free Market Foundation. And just like to say that I have it on good authority that there are only 8 fully electric vehicles in South Africa, and Eskom's already blaming them for the darkness. The fact of the matter is, as well, is that there will be no electric vehicles allowed into South Africa while we have the Eskom crisis, which means for the next 30 years you're going to have to forget about that. No, all jokes aside, please, Terry, come up.
Sorry, ladies and gents, just trying to sort out what's going on here. Just a moment.
Thank you very much, Mike and Harry Tar. I've been asked to give a free market foundation view on road funding. I've changed it into a free market view on road funding so that it's my view and not necessarily the Free Market Foundation's view. I've started off a few slides just to give you some theory, but I did write a book some years ago called Transport Policy, and if anybody in a moment of madness wants to read some more research, they're welcome. I'll send you a copy of my book. So I'm going to talk about what is a free market. Is this working? How the market operates, and some myths about the market. I start off telling you that, in my view, the market is probably the most moral system that's ever been designed by man. Why is it moral? Because any transaction that takes place between two people is on a voluntary basis. I don't have to buy from you, and you don't have to sell from me. It is not only moral, but it is also the most efficient system. We can have a debate about that. I don't think that there's any room for informed debate about whether it's efficient or not. It's based on individual rights, property rights. Crucial that the private ownership of property. And in this system, what would government's main role be? It would be a lot less than is currently done throughout the world. It would be there to protect individual rights, to have the police and the courts, and to uphold the rule of law. A brief summary of how a market operates, a very brief summary. Anyone, an entrepreneur, you, any of us, should be able to enter the market. There should be no government restrictions. The airline industry did that in the early 90s. They deregulated the airline industry. They didn't privatize SAA, unfortunately. We lost that one and we're still losing that one. But the fact that any airline, any person, any of you, if you've got a spare few $100 million, can start an airline, and that's what's happened. That is what we mean by freedom to enter the market, to deregulate the situation. What happens if entrepreneurs satisfy consumers? They prosper. If they don't, they fail. It's profit and loss situation. A critical element of this is that prices must be there and they must be free to rise and fall. So the supply and demand curve, and apologies to Mike for the 101 economics and so on, but when you get shortages, prices rise, more people come into the market, more competition, and prices should drop. And the opposite happens if there's surpluses. There are a few myths about the market, and whenever you get into a debate about these things, people refer to these very often. For example, they say, but what is the perfect price? Well, we've just seen a calculation done just now for what the road user charge would be in terms of the road weight. That's one assessment, whether it's the size of the vehicle and the weight of the vehicle and the time of the day and so on. It's a very complicated thing. I mean, you think of it when you go and buy a packet of chips in the shop. Are they going to work out how long it's been on that shelf for, and how many square millimeters it takes? So there are no such things as perfect prices. There's also no such thing as a perfect competition. It's often used as an argument against market forces when people say, okay, the reason we don't like free markets is because the competition isn't perfect. And then they go and set up a straw man and they say this is what it should be like. And finally, destructive competition, it's not really a myth, but it's actually one of the major pluses of a free market. It allows people who are not doing what the consumers want to stop doing it and let other people take over. Okay, in my mind, your biggest problem problem that society has to deal with is how to allocate your limited resources. You can have more of one thing, but you have less of something else. There's no way around that. So if we want more roads, we may have less education or less health, or vice versa. The question is, how do we decide it? There's a lovely stories about Robinson Crusoe and Man Friday. And the guys, Man Friday says to him, well, let's build a house today. And Robinson says, well, what about the fishing? You can't do both. If you're going to build a house, you're going to starve. If you're going to only fish, you're not going to have shelter. And that's what we face as individuals and we face as society. Essentially, there are only two ways to make that decision. There may be a lot in between, but those are the main two ways. One is you can do it by government decree. Government can say we are going to have so many kilometers of roads, so many cars, so much education, so much health, end of story. It's done in dictatorships, in communist countries, and it's referred to often as a command economy. Free markets rely on prices, property rights, and voluntary association, and that's obviously the one that I prefer. I've given you a few photographs here, which you may I'll ask you to try and identify where they take place. There's one over there, another one of congestion, another one of congestion. And the answer is, I haven't the foggiest idea. But they're everywhere and anywhere. It's absolutely insane that if you look in the Google Maps for under congestion, there are hundreds of these slides. Why? How can society carry on living like this? I mean, it really is insane. You know what Einstein's alleged to have said, that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. Well, this is crazy. So, why is there congestion? It's basic 101 economics. Too many cars, too few roads, your demand is greater than your supply, and you get queues. Congestion is a problem of supply being too small and demand being too great for supply. And I'm afraid to say we should really call it road shedding, because that's what it is. Now, I love a little quip that the mayor of New York once said. It's got really nothing to do with it, but I just like it. He's alleged to have said that the problem with New York is that it's so damn congested here that nobody ever comes here anymore. What is the solution? Well, you either reduce the number of cars or you provide more roads. How do you do that? Well, my suggestion is that we swap the roles of the government and the private sector. Why don't we let the government make the cars, there'll be less of them, let the private sector produce the roads and there'll be more of it, and we'll see pictures like that in the bottom. I'm glad you like that. I've used that a lot with my friends. I've never used it in a conference before. Please bear in mind that every single shortage that occurs is because prices are either too low, because the production is by government, or there's no combination, or a combination of all those three. So energy we have a shortage of is because the prices are too low. I could solve your energy crisis tomorrow. If I increase the energy price by 10-fold, we would have no more load shedding. Maybe it could be 8-fold or 7-fold, but if we increase it enough, we would solve the problem. So it's produced by government, and there's no competition at all. You can solve the energy crisis by allowing competition and by allowing the private sector in, but that's another story. What about surpluses? Well, why is it that if you want to get office space anywhere in the world, you can do so? It's because it's market related, the production is by the private sector, and there's competition. And that's a beautiful picture of Singapore, by the way, from the island looking towards the mainland. The last speaker actually spoke a bit about Singapore and so on. So let's just do a comparison about surpluses and shortages. If you look at the top two rows, offices and freight, there's no prices, and when I say freight, I mean road freight, so to speak. Prices are not regulated, it's produced by the private sector. Yes, there's competition, and no, there are no shortages. You want an office tomorrow, I'll get you one. You want to send somebody down to Durban by freight, you can do it. Energy and rail, I'm afraid the prices are regulated, it's produced by government, there's no competition, and yes, there are shortages. Airlines, a bit of a mixed bag. No prices regulated. It's produced by both the government and the private sector, but fortunately the government does not have a monopoly. That's what saved us as airline users. And there is competition, there's no shortages. And unfortunately we get down to roads, the prices, inverted commas, are regulated. It's produced by government, no competition, and hence we get shortages and lots of congestion. I like to think, because I'm an engineer, a starting point, that gravity is very similar to prices. If you ignore gravity as an engineer, your buildings collapse. If you ignore prices as an economist, you get an economic collapse. It may be less immediate and less dramatic, but it's more serious because the whole society suffers. And so congestion is essentially where you have no prices or the prices are too low. As a little aside, sometimes where the government has a monopoly, such as an airports company, and energy as well, there's a regulator to regulate the prices. And very often that regulation is based on what's known as a cost plus. This is a disaster because it's in the interest of the supplier to increase the cost. If you're building an airport, put in gold-plated finishes. Although your percentage is the same, your total amount of money will be increased. So it's a very, very poor way of doing it and encourages wasteful expenditure. There is no solution, by the way. The only solution is competition, so you need to privatize the airports. A famous story comes out of economics. It's known as the tragedy of the commons. Those of you who've done history will know that the commons was a piece of property that was owned by everybody, or the state, or the community, and so on. And there was grazing around it, and when everybody grazed, if everybody had 10 cattle, it was in my interest to put an 11th one on there. Everybody suffers, but I benefit more by putting 11th one. So there's no control about the use of the commons. The solution is twofold. Generally, the people say, what we must do is we must limit the amount of people that are using the commons, limit the number of cattle on. The alternative solution, which is far preferable, is you privatize the commons, which is what you do with farming. That person then will actually rationally use his farm in the most rational way, as farmers do. Now, the tragedy of the commons can be called the tragedy of the roads. The roads are owned by the government. You don't get overgrazing, you get congestion. Maybe you can have quotas. And the better solution is very radical, and I accept it's not going to happen in my lifetime, privatize the roads. I want to emphasize the importance of policy to you people. Really, it is so critical. We're talking a lot about policy. Most of us come from a background where we are technical and not policy people. But policy is absolutely fundamental. And I'll just use Hong Kong as an example. I don't know how many of you have been there, but it's very strange when you're on the mainland and you look towards Ireland and you say, why are all the major buildings on the island and not on the mainland? I mean, it's crazy. Why must you put them there? It's totally irrational, except for one thing, that the land on the island was under British control, and therefore, when you bought property there, you had freehold title, which you didn't have on the land. So property developers made a very rational decision. There are a couple of books that if you're really interested in economic policy and so on, I've got them on my desk if anybody wants to browse them. One is called Economic Freedom of the World, and it just shows that growth is dependent on policy. It's been going for 20 years. There are about 20 or 30 parameters, and it shows you if you want a blue book on how to create wealth, that's how you do it. Another one that we produced at the foundation was called Habits of Highly Effective Countries. So let's talk about road funding and the theory and the practice. In theory, the ownership should be private, the prices should be free to fall, competition should be possible, and there should be freedom of entry. As I said, it's unlikely that this is going to happen. Unfortunately, in practice, what we have is government ownership, no prices rising and fall. Maybe we will get them in the future with the way we're going. No competition, and competition is a big problem. I don't know how you solve that problem in roads, I really don't. Other than to say that competition doesn't have to be specifically another road next to another road. I mean, if you want to go down to Durban, you've got competition between the roadway and an airline, so to speak. But with the practice of how we actually do it, we get the congestion. So we've got to find some other way of doing it. I'm suggesting that the government must try and act. I don't know how you do that, act as a private owner. Many years ago, I did a study for Joburg. There was a parking problem, and I said to them, look, if I want to come and get a parking place in the center of Joburg, I can't. Your prices are too low. So I said, keep putting your prices up and up and up and up until you get 5 or 10% of the spaces available. I can't think of a more rational way of doing it. They didn't take my suggestion, but I think that's the way that you should be operating. You should be thinking, how would the market operate? Clearly the user must pay, as everybody else said this morning. That can be done from direct payment, tolls. Tolls no longer only as a going through a place, but tolls all the way, road user charging. And I think that it's better than the indirect way of fuel levy, which you also heard from just now. So let's look at the tolls, and this is a very brief summary. I haven't gone into as much detail as, and I don't know as much as the other people in the detail, but I think it's the best solution, but it's politically dynamite. No need to emphasize that. You get higher charges in the peak, and clearly that encourages carpools and public transport. And now, by the way, I think that there's an argument that would say you don't really have to subsidize public transport because it would be much cheaper for an individual to travel on a 50-seater bus than to travel in his car. So there would be an answer for that. Clearly, you've got to have a tender system that's fair, and you have to have your collection costs all over. But our problem is that we have been brought up that roads are free. And we have got a major education problem ahead of us, a major one. Really, I would say that, and I'm going to say it again, all our resources should be going to educate people that roads are not free. We use the acronym TANSTAFL, which stands for there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. So the problem is to charge for something that has not been free. And I was really surprised that when we started with the Gauteng road network, we put the prices up too high. Your biggest problem, your biggest jump is going from nothing to something. Make that jump ridiculously low and let it settle down for a year or two. And then you can push it up and up and up. But realize that you're dealing with people who are used to driving for nothing, not paying for it directly, and that's how I think you could get around it. The fuel levy, a lot of people have been speaking about, both Mike and the other one. Clearly, you have a problem that it's, the advantage, of course, is very easy and cheap to collect, but busy roads mean that the price will be too low, and so that the people using busy roads will be subsidized the people using not so, the less congested roads. I'm not sure about this, Mike. I think it goes into general revenue. It's not dedicated, is it? It is. No, it's not dedicated. So it hasn't been dedicated for 40 years. I remember having this discussion many decades ago. And yeah, and there's none of that left in any case. Yeah. So you have to, maybe if you could convince everybody to dedicate it, maybe there's an answer for a fuel levy. But the fact of the matter is that we can't. I mean, we've got to face that reality. So you get cross-subsidization, and what about electric cars? Eventually, as you see, you get no revenue from them. And that's going to happen in the next 20, 30 years. So I think we've got to think of not only the fuel levy. So it appears that neither tolls nor fuels levy reflect true competitive prices, but the existing model, we know, think of those congestion things, is not a success. I'm suggesting you simulate the market and remember that competition, as I said earlier, can be from other modes of transport, such as air travel. I've just very briefly touched on Singapore. There's a lot to be said about it, as Mr. Solomon said about it. The area license scheme was introduced in 75, replaced by electronic pricing. I don't think you mentioned, but there's a vehicle quota system. It's horrific. If you want a vehicle there, I think they go out a tender every year, and the price is like about umpteen times what the cost of the road is. And hence there are very few cars on the road. They've also got an excellent public transport system. There are other examples. One I read about a long time ago, that in Houston, on the west side of Houston, which is an enormous area, probably the side of Joburg, there were a number of property developers that got together there, and they did two things. They actually paid for their own freeway, went through their own properties, and they went for it. So you can get private construction and privately funded roads, and they also incidentally facilitated an airport in that area. Congestion pricing, we've been speaking about it. London, I understand that New York now is about to enter into the congestion price game in the next 2 or 3 years, and that in Los Angeles and Philadelphia is talking about it. So I think in the next 5 or 10 years there's going to be a lot more of that happening, and maybe that will be part of the way we can educate people that you've got to pay for it. I like the little story of Sun City. How does the private sector solve a problem? Well, it provided a big parking area on the perimeter of the thing, of the property, and you catch a SkyTrain from there in. So you can solve problems, but they have to be, there are solutions, and the private sector does sometimes solve them. Yeah. There's a document that's just come out by the USA Transportation Research Board, came out at the end of last year, and they have a massive problem. They've got to replace the interstate highway system. If you want to have a nightmare, you read the numbers there. They recommended, incidentally, funding by an increase in the federal fuel taxes. But they do point out that there's a possible loss of revenue eventually when the electric vehicle comes in. Now, another study has been done by an organization called Reason Foundation Study, and let me let you know about that. Reason Foundation is a free market foundation, so is a free market organization. They are saying fuel taxes are highly unlikely and inadvisable. They recommend tolls rather than fuel taxes. They point out that a lot of the states in America are starting to use tolls to finance interstate construction. And they make suggestions, I've given you the reference there, how to make tolls politically feasible and consumer friendly. So this is the last slide. Where do we go from here? You've got to simulate the market. I think you've got to put on a hat that says, how would we operate if we were in the private sector? What would we do? We've got to allow the private sector to build, own, and operate, and not transfer, but keep owning it. You want people, it may be highly unlikely, but if somebody was prepared to put money into building a road, you want him to make a lot of money on it. You want to encourage other people to come in and make more money on it. So you want him to own it. And then the most important thing, if you're talking about funding, is nothing that we've spoken about. I think the introduction this morning, you said we have got no wealth in this, no money in this country, there's no wealth. We have to get rich. Rich countries can afford roads and everything else. If we're going to stay poor, we can't. So we need growth, and we need growth. I've just spent a few weeks in Cambodia and Vietnam, which had the most horrific history, as you all know. They are now currently, both of them, growing at 7 or 8% a year. You do your calculation that in 20 years since they've been doing this, they've quadrupled 4 times. Singapore and Hong Kong, by the way, in the 60s, had the same GDP per capita as we had. They're now 5, 6, 7 times us. I think we're $5,000. I can't remember. And they stayed. That's what happens if you introduce market mechanisms and and what happens with growth. Again, I'm referring to this economic freedom of the world problem. We have to educate people of the importance of roads. Everybody, not just ourselves, but you've got to go to academics, journalists, engineers, etc., etc. And gentlemen, I'm afraid that's a long-term project. But unless people in the society do understand the importance of roads, we're not going to go anywhere. Oh, thank you.
I think a great one, Terry. Just want to tell you, thank you for informing me. I'm the new owner of all roads in South Africa. I'm a private citizen. You will now be paying decent prices for your roads. And I'd like to get rich. Thank you very much. We're going to lunch now, Harry, and we're going to be back at 1:45, very sharply. Let's try and make it, in fact, 1:20, and then we try and leave here a little earlier to avoid the holiday rush. As you know, this is a big, long weekend, and you'd probably like to spend a bit more time at home. See you at 1:22.
Thank you, Mike. Wayne, can you please just come and see me? Thank you.
As somebody on a different note, I really enjoyed Terry's presentation and in a personal capacity. But I'd like to put an idea in Terry's mind to start this off with. And I hope this is working now. Yeah, it is. So you can hold that. But my question is very simply, how do you create competition between roads? Well, perhaps we're going to look at it differently, because you gave us part of the answer when you said people fly down to Durban or they drive down to Durban. And obviously a truck can't fly down, maybe, but a truck has competition from rail. And we should then privatize the rail. Trucks are already privatized. Alternatives in public transport around here should be such, maybe, that it's more efficient and cheaper, run by the private sector. Maybe to start off, it will need a bit of capital injection from the government, because this whole thing takes 7 or 10 years for public transport to build steam. And then look at it. I was talking to Jack about, what the problems are with some of our public transport operators. They're not on time, their buses or trains don't pitch. And if you have that, then you in a way have competition for the road. That's now apart from, say, privatizing the roads, because we all know the roads now belong to me. So I'm just being nice, in this question, and so on. But what would you say, just to start this panel off?
So before I answer the question, I have an admission to make. The photograph I showed and said this is how offices are built, and I said apparently that it was Singapore. My apologies, it was Hong Kong. We were just talking at lunch, and I said to somebody at lunch, I said, if you're going to argue for free markets, it's very easy to argue for them if you're talking about the corner cafe. You can have a corner cafe on this cafe corner, and then you can have another corner cafe on on the next corner. It gets more and more difficult as you get into the big infrastructure things. I've done quite a lot of work on energy, and I'm convinced that you could privatize the whole energy system. I have no problem with that. But roads are very, very, very difficult. I don't know anybody who's come up with the perfect solution. So what I would say, you cannot have 2 roads next to each other. That's insane. Okay, I mean, you can have Pick and Pay and Checkers next to each other, but okay. I would say, you may think it's very silly, I would say start off and remove any regulation that stops a developer or anybody, investor, from building a road. I don't know my legislation at the moment, but I'm jolly sure I can't go and do that at the moment. And sit back for a moment and look at that, okay. It's quite amazing what can happen, what the private sector does. They're just very creative. But in the end, I think that all you can do is what we were talking about, and what you summarized so nicely, was all the different ways of charging for the roads. The problem with that is, what do you do with the money? In a free market, You want the money to go into the guy's pocket, so he makes a hell of a lot of money, so that you come in and you compete with him. And then you provide more of those services. Now, I don't know how you do that in roads, and that's why I came up and I said, all I can suggest is you've got to act as if you are in the private sector and act as rationally as you can. And we can talk about things, and you can get people to act more rationally by charging for the roads. We were talking again over lunchtime by saying that somebody who living out of town needs to make a decision based on how much it costs him to get into town, as opposed to his rental, cheap rental out of town and more expensive rental in town. So it may be more sensible for him not to travel long distances and move into town. But we don't make those decisions at the moment because we can't. We don't have the opportunity. So the answer is, I don't know what the answer is, but I think that we can move in that direction.
I would like to ask one follow-up question, and then it's open to the floor for 2 questions. But on the road side, how much road are we building right now, Mr. Solomons? Let's call it new road and maybe maintaining old roads, if you can split it into those two.
No, those kind of stats, unfortunately, does not exist. So I can't I can't answer it yet. But very little, I would say, will go into additional road capacity. It's by and large going into either expanding capacity or maintenance, and that's where most of the funding goes. I just want to touch on the issue of the very issue of privatizing roads. It's a difficult one, however, there are some aspects that one can look at. And why I say that, if one considers that there are toll roads currently operated by private entities, and if one have the stats in terms of cost to operate that road, to maintain it, how safe it is, etc., and one sets benchmarks, best practice, then one would then ask road authorities to be able to compete with that benchmarks, as an example. So that is one angle to consider in the scheme of things.
Thanks. So, if you look at history, there's some very, very interesting examples. Many roads in the USA and the UK were privately developed. And the railways, of course, in the USA were always privately developed. And by the way, the farmers would encourage the railway guys to come onto through their farm and say, look, you can have this piece of property, because they wanted the railways near them. Now, that's how the market works. We don't know exactly how it works, but it works like that, yeah. The very first underground in London, I believe, was in the 1850s, 1860s. And I think it was built by a private sector who had a development out in the northwest thing, and he wanted to make it easier or improve the accessibility from his development into the middle of London. Now, in New York, all the undergrounds were privately operated until the 1930s, or thereabout. And what happened? The price mechanism was stopped. In other words, the government came in and said, guys, you're charging too much. They kept the prices down. They all went out of business, and the government took them over. So there are examples of where the private sector has provided infrastructure, and there can be examples of that. But imagine if they'd never put a stop to that. Imagine if you'd never had the stop, never reduced the prices in America, in New York, what would have happened now? And that's why I say to you that the most important thing is to have the right price for something.
Anybody got a question over here?
It's not a question. I think my voice is loud.
Yeah, your voice is loud.
It's not a question, but more of a comment. For the last 50 years or more, we've built roads in a traditional way. Here today, we only delved on one aspect. I would like to suggest, yes, over the past 20 years or so, the entire world has been looking for new ways and new means of building roads better and cheaper. Yes, we have come up with a technology right now. And in the not too distant future, in fact, certain parts of the country have started hearing about it already. But Mace Consulting in the report on the 1st of April, alluded that if the process in which they are maintaining roads at the moment, by the year 2030, it's going to cost us 203 billion rand a year. So don't you think the whole world in all other categories are looking for new technology? And I think we need to embrace new technology. I don't want to go into the ridiculous cost of building roads right now, the bribery and the corruption. But I think let us look internally. And I'm happy to report that right here in South Africa, there is a new technology for the world that you would be hearing about in the not too distant future. Thank you.
Okay, I take that as a comment. One more question, because we're running out of time. Harry?
Yes. My name is Oscar. The surname is Mola. The company is a trading enterprise. My question is that how can we improve the commuters rate transport system? Because lots of guys, they've been losing jobs because of the train stuck in the middle. And sometimes some other commuters, they get emotion invoked because of the system is not efficient. And sometimes these trains, when they're not going well, they don't report to tell the commuters. How can the government intervene? Because not all of the commuters can able to use some taxis, to use the cars, because of the cost effective. But because of this train is not efficient, some are they forced to get it to the taxis. They get stuck by convoy, get late because of all of us. We take cars, taxis be on the road because the rail is not effective. If I put my car at home and try to catch a rail, I get stuck on the road. Sometimes doesn't come at all. How can we improve the rail transport system?
Let me. I think it's a problem in this sense. We're talking road funding and not commuter thing, but on the commuter side, I think we all know PRASA is government owned. It is inefficient. It's not working. I don't know who's burning all the trains. Some of the stuff says to me it's sometimes the insiders, the unions. Sometimes it's the taxi operators that might be involved because they want to enforce the people to go. And the same applies to some of the buses. I think in South Africa we have a mixture of private buses running on government tender contracts. And we have government buses in the form mainly of buses that are run by municipalities. I think the system at the moment is very inefficient, purely by the fact that you would get 3 or 4 buses from different companies going a certain route. On other routes you get nobody. So you'll get a Gautrain bus, you'll get a Metro bus, a BRT bus, and a Putco bus doing a certain route in Sandton, and not one of them picks up somebody else's customers. They all pick up only their own customers. So that to me is a problem. But let's just say it's mainly, in the main, a problem of government inefficiency, process inefficiency, and it is also a problem of criminality that needs to be addressed. Because I think at the other end, you need law enforcement. You cannot have this sort of lawlessness where trucks are burnt on the one side, train coaches on the other, and that's my best answer. And I don't think any of the two gentlemen here, we were talking more roads, so I just took this question because it's something I think about every now and then. Can we stop this panel discussion? There's no burning questions, I hope. Then we get to the main event. Wayne Divenage from Outer will present first. It will be a 15-minute presentation. I only have 2 rules. They don't kill each other. Maining is okay. The second thing is that everybody has 15 minutes. I'll allow 16, but if you go over that, then it's intensive care. If you go over 18, it's graveyard. And that's what it will be. Harry will help me keep the time. I will ask the first question or two right after the debates, after which we will open it up to the floor. I will be listening with you here and writing down what I think and want to ask. I want you all and encourage you all to do the same. The questions, I will also limit the time that you can ask a question. I don't want statements, I want questions, and we are focusing on the future and not on the past. If you want to talk about the past, we can get retired CEOs and so on coming to speak to you at another occasion. We're here to debate the future. So I'll hand you over to Wayne. I hope you're all set up.
No, I'm not.
Not
So
yet.
don't
Must I
start
tell you-
your clock yet, please.
No. Harry starts the clock. I'll just tell
don't start
stupid
it.
jokes. Okay. Yeah, and I think that's where we are. This is being live streamed, so when you do ask a question, wait for the mic to come to you. Harry or whoever will bring the mic. I think we should limit questions to a maximum of 30 or 45 seconds that you should ask a question in. We can allow one or two people to make a statement towards the end, and then Harry will give us a prize if you put your card in the box so that he can send you some emails in future. We can't start the clock yet, I agree, but I'm going to go and fetch my little piece of writing equipment here so I can write down things.
I think, do you mind while we're just setting up, I just want to say that I'd love to have been part of this discussion. We
are
had
part of
asked, and I wasn't part of the panel discussion. We were offered a full presentation. Unfortunately, we were only given 15 minutes. We have a lot of stuff to say and to counter some of these things. I'm going to try and fit this into 15 minutes, folks. It's information you need to hear in this debate, and I'm afraid you cannot ignore the past in dealing with the issues that we have to deal with here. So, you know, Harry, thanks for inviting and offering this forum to another debate where we will bring other economists to counter so much that was said, because there's a lot of stuff. And we look forward to that day where I can give a full 30-minute, 40-minute presentation. Unfortunately, I've been told I cannot. I've got 15 minutes. Forgive me. I'm telling you now, we'll be going a couple of minutes over, if you don't mind. And if there's any objection, let's ask the room if that's a problem for them. Okay, so is it all set up? Let me just find the presentation. I'm sorry, I did it on a Mac and the fonts weren't right on the other. There it is. Okay. Thanks, folks. I want to dispel a few myths quickly. ARTA doesn't oppose new or upgraded road infrastructure, as is often put out there. Nor do we oppose e-tolling technology. It works. It works in environments where it is fitting. It works in Hong Kong, works in Singapore, works in many parts of the world. But it also fails in many parts of the world, as it has failed here. In fact, this e-tolling scheme here has failed more dismally than any other e-tolling scheme that has failed in the world. Yeah. Okay, stop your clock. I tried to could do that. No. Is that not coming through on the double? Okay, so let me, I think I'll just go to the settings. Well, let me just go to this. Where is it? Settings. Okay. Yeah. Viewers will see a presenter view, but that's not a problem. Okay, so as I said, we don't oppose new tolls. We need them. We don't oppose technology. We also recognize the value of roads for economic development. All the shopping centers that go up on the sides of roads, this is great. This is about roads. We need them. This issue, though, is about funding and the e-tolling scheme. We also know that road infrastructure doesn't come for free. Ultimately, society pays for it, and we need these additional phases in Gauteng, the Maritzburg to Durban route, and so forth. But if it is society that ultimately picks up the costs of road funding, then the funding mechanism must be in the best interests of society, must always be at the lowest cost and most efficient process, and it needs to be introduced lawfully. The Gauteng Freeway e-tolling project relied on a public buy-in and acceptance, and all e-tolling schemes around the world rely on that. And that is achieved through trust, transparency, and rationality. Sadly, SANRAL's e-toll plans were severely marred by misleading information, certainly on the e-tag uptake propaganda, poor public engagement, and intimidation. They started losing the people before they even launched the scheme. There was a lack of transparency on the toll tenders, the contract values, the road construction costs, the political confusion between the ruling party, the only party, by the way, that approved the e-toll scheme, has been chaotic, and it puts doubt into people's minds since 2014, and certainly with Makura's claims over the last year or so from a political point of view. And this scheme lacked meaningful public engagement. The public at large became aware of it when the gantries went up in 2010, long after the decision was made. The scheme also required accurate information and efficient systems. It relies on eNatus. But eNatus is not accurate. Some put it at 50% inaccurate. It also relies on an efficient postal system. Well, I don't have to tell you about that. And it requires a very effective regulatory and enforcement environment. It relied, this scheme, unfortunately, on R2, which has not even got off the ground. We have seen the regulations and the acts go back and forth, changing the regulatory environment a number of times while e-tolling was tried to be launched. Is this a criminal matter? Is it a civil matter? Is there blacklisting? Yes or no? All of these questions and all of these issues and problems play into the failure of an e-toll scheme. And if you look at what happened over the period after e-tolls was launched, these are SANRAL's figures, by the way, not ours. This is the revenue that they generated. From March the 3rd in 2013, for the first 6 months, they managed to get up to 40% compliance. And this was after an extremely coercive campaign. SMSs threatening people with criminal records and emails and so forth. But what happened was it peaked in June 2014 at 40% compliance. And then what happened after that? Well, remember as well that SANRAL had said in court that they would achieve a 93% compliance rate and that they would need and would be able to get the 260 million rand a month. That grey line shows where they should be at 93% compliance. But they dealt themselves two big blows. Government dealt them two big blows. The first one was in May 2014 in Parliament, in a question answered in Parliament. Minister Peters said that criminal charges cannot happen. But SANRAL had been threatening criminal charges. And that was the first blow to the scheme. The second blow was when David Makura was elected to the premiership, and he announced the launch of the e-toll assessment panel. Now, why did he do that? Because they needed to look into this matter. What does that do to the public? It creates doubt. And so what happened? Not because of OUTA. The scheme started failing straight away. It was a totally irrational scheme, and the public were coerced to get to 40%, and it collapsed, went down below 50 million rand a month. It started to pick up after that when David Makura said, no, look, we're not going to force this issue anymore, and so it was back into the public's hands. It was in October 2015 that OUTA launched the e-toll defense umbrella. In October 2015, the scheme was failing and running at 30% compliance by then. And we were asked to run this e-toll defense umbrella and scheme because the public needed protection against SANRAL's threats. And the Constitutional Court, sorry, the Supreme Court had indicated that a collateral challenge could be brought and the public could defend themselves. And that was the birth of this scheme. Obviously, there's a spike there. That was when SANRAL launched their 60% carrot, a discount, to try and get people back on board. They managed to get 139 million rand in over 4 months, but compliance went straight back. So this carrot and stick approach was certainly not working. And since then, the compliance has continued to decline. And if you look at the figures beyond March 18, Sanral will show you it's declined even further from that. So why does ETC place the scheme's failure at Arta's feet? Why are we the terrorists, as we are often referred to about this issue? I want to show you something that's really serious. Now, in Makura's panel in November, his presentation to the panel, slide number 218, this is Sanral's presentation to the Makura panel. The ETC joint venture won this contract at 6.2 billion rand. The reality is that in this contract that was eventually signed, 3 years earlier, folks, why are we presenting to panels that was the tender process and that was the winning tender, when in the actual contract, ETC's contract, that amount of operation service has gone from 4.7 billion rand to 8.2 billion rand. Now, they'll tell us that they haven't got that. Of course they haven't. The public wouldn't let them have that. But there's a question there, because you cannot ignore the fact that road funding is impacted by administration costs. And these are the administration costs which they would have achieved. That is a 1.64 billion rand per annum. Had the public rolled over, had the public complied in 93% compliance, that is what they were entitled to. And that is what they would have got. We have to see it that way. We have to factor this into the costs of road funding in South Africa. So had they done so, as we said, they would have got that. Obviously, due to public resistance, they never got that money. What they actually got is over the last year, 643 million rand. They didn't reduce their operations drastically. Still got similar amounts of centers, similar amounts of staff. So what happened to the 1 billion rand that they didn't get? Or what would they have done is the question, with an additional 1 billion rand per annum that they would have received and could have received had they got their way. These are contracted costs, folks, and they cannot be ignored when you discuss road funding, especially through an ETOL model. So construction costs also play into road funding, and it's very, very important that we discuss this. This is the elephant in the room. Let's go back to Sanral's declaration of intent in 2005 to 2008. On page 27 in their documents, I want to ask one question. What do you think Sanral's ability to understand what road construction costs were in 2004? We think it was good. If anybody knows what the cost of road construction is, it's Sanral. And in their declaration of intent, when they put down that they were going to do a 340-kilometer expansion to the Gauteng freeway project, they were going to need money to do that and get bonds, they indicated then that a 340-kilometer upgrade and addition to Gauteng's road network would be 4.6 billion rand in 2004's prices. At an average of 4 lanes, brand new, 2 lanes either way, that would work out to be about 3.4 million rand per lane kilometer. And that's right. In fact, we verified this to a number of engineering and construction and road construction firms that do work for Sanral, and that has been put down as an extremely reasonable cost of road construction. But what happened? If you add CPI increases to that, you would have got that 340-kilometer upgrade by 2008 at 6 billion rand. And yet the GFIP of almost half of that cost 18 billion rand. I want to let that sink in. Nearly 3 times the price for half the amount of road space. Something is fundamentally wrong. And even if you doubled Sanral's declaration of intent of 340 kilometers at 2008 prices, even if you doubled it because they might not have gone into too much detail, well, that gives 12 billion rand for the 340 kilometers. And GFIP cost 18 billion, 17.9 to be precise, for 186 kilometers. What changed? What did change was Zoomonomics, as a number of economists call it. Due to the inflated costs of construction in South Africa after 2007, you cannot ignore this when you discuss road pricing, certainly not going forward. The state-owned institutions are the custodians of our money on capital expenditure projects. Significant variances to the norm, any variance, Sanral had to deal with that. They had to pull the construction industry into line Otherwise, import construction companies to do the roads if they're going to play the games that they did, the collusion, but it was far more than collusion. They are there to protect us, and they didn't protect us from this absolute nonsense. And when the CIDB, the Construction Industry Development Board, started investigating this, what happened? They told them, the politicians told them to stop investigating it, and the CEO said he wanted to investigate it, and he was removed. This stuff is serious for us, folks, and you cannot ignore that. Sanral's Gauteng project at 70.9 was grossly excessive. It lacked transparency. Our engineers put it at max when you put everything in their favor at 10 billion rand. And if that was the case, then the Gauteng funding model would not have included e-tolls, because its administration costs then become even more absurd. Finding solutions for road funding in South Africa requires that road construction costs are free from collusion and corruption, and that absolute transparency is necessary, and that we exercise caution when we borrow against inflated and meaningless asset values. As Bernal Floors told Sanral, well, if you've got this massive balance sheet and it looks so good, sell some of your assets to settle your debt. Guess what? They can't. They cannot sell their assets, and those values are meaningless. So you go and borrow against that, and then you have a problem. All existing and possibly new mechanisms need to be explored. We know that. Taxes, including levies, which, by the way, is a user pay scheme. And we keep getting told no. E-tolls is the only user pay scheme. What nonsense. We have been funding, as the gentleman said earlier on, road construction in this costs without e-tolls. E-tolls, by the way, or tolling, is responsible for 15% of our roads. 85% or 83% of our roads are not funded through tolls. We know we've got an issue. We know we need the finances, and we'll have to deal with that. But e-tolling is not the answer here. To recognize, though, it's important that we do that. Gauteng is significant in its contribution to the South African economy, and all citizens benefit from its road. And guess what? This is verified by the Department of Transport's cabinet memo from the minister at the time, Radebe, on page 1 in July 2007, where he says the state of the freeway system in Gauteng is a concern not only for Gauteng but South Africa as a whole. Gauteng contributes 38% of the country's domestic product, gross domestic product. It is the economic hub of South Africa. It makes sense then to fund this partially through taxation, or all of it through taxation, or partially through other levies that feed into taxation. So this supports Arta's view that national taxes and levies should be used to fund Gauteng's project. The annual funds that were required, by the way, on the 18 billion, Arta's position on the 10 billion rand would have required that Treasury allocates just 1.25 billion. But let's move beyond that. There was an 18 billion rand road project. So let's fund that. This was the alternative that that Sanral had and the department had. 2.2 billion rand can we get per annum, please, Treasury, to fund this project, this expensive project? And that's what it would have cost them. 2.2 billion. You want to add in all the toll infrastructure and that, well, then ours goes up to 2.86, but they didn't need to put it in because we could have funded this project from 2.2 billion rand from Treasury. And if Treasury's pot is completely dry, then if you increase the fuel levy by 10 cents, and this is verified by economists, econometrics, impact investment, Bernal Floors, these are respectable, highly trained and experienced economists in road for infrastructure funding. That's their figures, folks. And if you needed to cover 21 billion, well, then it goes up to 11 cents. Because if you put that to 23 billion rand, just work it out. And government could have got that money. That's 100%. If they decided to fund partially through toll increase and partially through government taxes, which they should, everybody benefits. So now we have a problem. We have to renegotiate these, and that is one of the options. Renegotiate the PRC contracts. It's now at 47 billion rand. Well, that's going to cost us now 5.9 billion rand a year. Sadly, because of this, I'm going to go a little bit over the 1 minute, Harry. Sadly, this is the reality that we have been put into as a result of a problem by government and poor leadership. But if you really have to finance it, you really have to, through an increase in the fuel levy, it's going to cost you 26 cents. We're talking GFIP here. We can talk about all the other roads another time. This is an issue here for this bond that we're talking about, and we do need to find solutions for all the other roads, and we know that. This is the fuel levy, by the way, and in the States they never increase their fuel taxes and they have a problem. And that research that Terry referred to, which does say the fuel levy is the option to go and read it. Not the one that he referred to secondly on the Free Market Foundation. I agree, Terry, a lot of the Free Market Foundation stuff is right, but this is not a free market environment. But the research that showed the fuel levy will tell you why. And if you had have added the 10 cents at the time when it was right, that's the amount. But they went and pushed the fuel levy up way beyond that. So the money, quite frankly, folks, is there. Of course it's been squandered elsewhere in the country. Of course we have had bad politicians that have done a lot and put us in a massive hole. We've got to get out of that hole. We've got to find that money. But that was the solution, which was completely ignored, and it was applying an existing policy, and they didn't look into it. Had they done so, the capital costs would have already been paid. But here we are. Haven't settled a cent on that GFIP bond. So if you take that, that's the road funding that we are saying. 2.24 billion rand to settle the road construction. Now you need to add in the e-toll administration costs. If everything went according to plan for ETC, they would have added another 1.64 billion rand per year to that bill. So the bill then goes from 2.24 to 3.8, or with the bigger bond now, to 4.3 billion. And the reality there is that that is an additional 61%. Now, we can't ignore this. Of course, ETC says they didn't get that, but this is what they would have gotten. When we debate road funding, this is the figure you have to use because this was the contracted figure. 61% addition to the funds you needed just to administer the scheme. Not on our watch, not in this country. We'll not tolerate this gross abuse. So the e-toll scheme has it's dead. I've got a couple of slides left. It barely covers the administration costs. You cannot try and revive a defunct scheme. It is completely senseless to continue down this road. To keep suggesting that e-tolls is the only user pays scheme is just incorrect. To move forward, I just suggest that we acknowledge the current scheme cannot fund the GFIP debt, not after 5 years and continuing to fail. And if we want to try and summons and lock up and start repatriating goods from, summoning goods from the public to do so, well then that's the ultimate sin that you're going to commit against society. We need the bonds with PIC to be renegotiated, obviously. Worst case scenario, that 4.7 billion rand could be funded through a hybrid. 3 billion rand from taxes and a 15-cent increase in the fuel levy gives you the other 2.9 billion, or some variation of that. Government now needs to establish a road funding committee, needs to include obviously SANRAL, civil society, construction industry board. We need to address these issues. We need this road regulator, which by the way was promised by government a number of years ago. We've got to find the solutions. SANRAL builds good roads. We're not opposed to SANRAL and the engineers and their staff. But we need to get construction back on track. And we're not going to do it by flogging a dead horse. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry? No problem. I think just fair, we'll let Kuni also go to it. I think we're just setting up again here.
Oh, okay, okay.
Sneaky suspicion we're going to get somebody focusing more on the future now. Anyway, let's get this. And don't worry, we're not counting the time for you yet.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me? Great. Mic, time's on. Okay, great. Yeah, I think, Wayne, thank you. You certainly did not disappoint me. That was exactly my expectation, for you to be stuck in history. But I think it is really important for us that, as I said this morning, that we need to move forward. I think there's a couple of points that I would like to raise this afternoon, which is about, I think, where we are and where do we need to get to succeed. I think the first thing that where we are is that we all recognize, that what we need is, it's clear that a fuel levy will not in itself support us and help us build new infrastructure. It is also clear that government needs private sector to assist and make sure that we can build infrastructure. I think what we do have is, on top of the existing problems that we have today, by Wayne's own numbers, we will see that there's an additional 16 billion rand interest bill to calculate. And that, I think, a government classifies as wasteful and wrongful expenditure, interest. And I think this is where we as citizens need to also take responsibility and understand that we harm the next generation. We harm the next generation in terms of building infrastructure and roads and improving our economy. I think a couple of things that I would like to raise. Where are we today? I think this has been covered today, is 220 cars added to our road network, 500,000, almost 600,000 vehicles over the last 5 years, 11 million vehicles. These are all facts. They are real facts. Public transport obviously is problematic. Congestion is a real problem for us. They estimate that road users in Gauteng today spend between 14 and 17 days in traffic. That is an additional month. It's a man-month almost that people spend in traffic every day throughout the year. Where do we need to be? We need to maintain, and I think we all agree that Gauteng is the powerhouse. Gauteng drives our economy. It contributes to roughly 40% of GDP. We need to continue to make sure that we reduce congestion, that we improve the quality of lives of our people. Urbanization was raised earlier today as also a major contributing issue. So how do we keep Gauteng moving? I think one of the answers lies in the GFIP. What we have seen is that we have been able to, well, SANRAL was able to construct phase 1. Phase 2 and phase 3 is not built yet. The reason why it's not built, and because we have an interest bill of almost 16 billion rand to cover, is because we have people promoting lawlessness. And that, I think, is a real issue. What we have today is we have very clear case law. The High Court ruled that the GFIP project is legal. The GFIP project is a proper process of consultation was considered. And if people want to bring an opposing view, they must lodge a case, which OTA did. But OTA doesn't really want to solve this problem for us because it contributes to the 18,000 people that pays their fees every month. And I think this is the problem that we have. We have an organization that on the one hand says, we want to hold ministers accountable, we want to hold government accountable for how we manage our tax, how we administrate tax, how we deal with people that have been part of corruption and collusion. But at the same time, we have an organization that then decides which laws are applicable to them and not. We have a constitution. We have a constitution that covers us for that. If you do not agree with the law, then follow the constitution. Go to court and change the law. But you can't change the law unilaterally and decide certain laws apply to you and certain laws that doesn't apply to you. We can't have that because what we have then is chaos. We have then a lawless society. And that is the fundamental problem we have with OTA at this point in time. We have to understand that if we want to build South Africa and move forward, we actually have to engage in a constructive way. I have no problem if somebody wants to declare etals illegal. But follow the process, Wayne. And make sure that you do not contribute to the lawlessness in South Africa. What is the benefits of GFIP? I think the first thing is that it will save millions of man-hours in travel time. It will link impoverished communities. There's a very clear strategy to link the West Rand, that is Soweto, with the eastern side of our economy in Gauteng. We know that we need to create more investment hubs on the West Rand, and this new phase 2 will increase that. Improved incident management. One of the safest places where you can be today is on the GFIP. Unlocking development opportunities, we have spoken about that at large. We know that it attracts investment. We know that it unlocks investment. We know that it creates jobs. What does South Africa need today? We need jobs. We need investment. We need to have people contributing to the economy. How do we do that? Not by saying that somebody got a tender and breaking down existing assets that we have as government. And then I think facilitate investment is really crucial. So the big question is, how do we fund it? I think it is very clear from today's presentations that government cannot afford to fund it on its own. Government cannot afford to sustain this at this point in time. So what do we have to do? We have to create alternatives. We have to create partnerships with private businesses in order to fund these models. And it was discussed. In most instances, infrastructure can be constructed by private organizations. The fuel levy, we know, is a diminishing fund. We understand that. I think it is over the last 4 sessions that we've had in the last 6 months, it has been proven time and time and time again that it's a diminishing fund. It actually harms the poor more than it protects the rich, and I do not think that it's an equitable fund at all. The user pay concept, even OTA agrees that the user pay concept is a concept to follow. And I think from that perspective, it is really important that we then find proper solutions around how do we make people responsible for it. We don't stop paying for water and lights. We pay for it. We pay for our cell phone accounts. We do know that we have to pay for what services we use. I think we do need to educate society a bit. I think we need to educate society, and that point was made earlier today to say that we need to explain to people that roads are not for free. Infrastructure is not for free. If we want a world-class system and services, if we want to remain the powerhouse in Africa, if we want to be proud of our province in Gauteng, we do need to understand that there is investment required. In my view, one of the greatest success stories that was ever done, which is exactly in line with government's view, is to say government procured new technology overseas. Government installed that technology in South Africa. State-of-the-art, world-class technology. It transferred the knowledge to South Africans. Today in ETC, we've got 1,200 people working full-time, and they are South Africans. They've got skills. It's skills that we didn't have 10 years ago. We've got an asset as citizens. We have an asset as citizens that can contribute to big questions like, how do we solve the integrated fare solution? We should be proud of this. We shouldn't destroy it. And I think this is where we need to change our views. One of the things is you can continue to oppose certain implementations and certain laws instituted by government. But in the long run, we only hurt. We all hurt today because we have an additional 16 billion rand debt to pay. On top of, and that could have paid almost for another phase of GFIP, because we resist. And I think there is a place in society for organizations like OTA. But I do think that also the public needs to hold OTA accountable and saying that we cannot promote lawlessness in our country. Follow the laws, follow the constitution, and make sure that we manage our lives according to that. Thank you.
course, yes.
Kuni says we need roads, so we know we need roads. That part of the debate is over. So the question then is, in my mind anyway, is how do we take where we are now and go forward? Because right now, us here in this room can do your forecast, and I don't mean it. So we need to move forward from today.
Sure.
We can't, I mean, I'm not involved in any corruption as far as I know. Yeah, I don't think so.
You just own all the.
I think I owe John Fraser here a meal or two. I got him to pay 2 more meals than he should. But other than that, so how do we fund this? Let me ask the first question then. What percentage do you think the user should pay, and what percentage for roads? Forget the amount.
Yeah.
And what percentage should taxation pay for roads? And then, within that, both of you can answer the same question. You think about it. What is your user pays solution? In other words, is it fuel tax? Is it congestion tax? Is it a thing in your car? Is it a license fee? Because that's all, in a way, user taxes. It's not, the other one, a tax is a tax. I mean, we already, just as a thing, we're on the World Bank, we're the 8th highest tax country in the world as a percentage of GDP, by the way. If you go to the broader one, the UN wider Institute of Tax and Development, then we're number 12 or 13 highest tax country in the world. Our personal income taxes, by the way, rank higher than that. We're number 10 in the world as a percentage zone. Our indirect taxes, which would include fuel taxes, are actually low. But that's just as a start. I think let's just say user pays tax, what's each of yours breakdown. The second part, what part of user pays would you recommend, or what sort of combination would you recommend?
You'll start with me.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's understand that society pays 100% of road infrastructure. Society. Let's also understand that the user pays principle is inconsistent, because there are many roads in this country I don't use. I don't travel on them. And there is no user pay scheme on them anyway. They're paid for by taxes. This is 1%, by the way, Gauteng's freeways. 1% of South Africa's, of Sanral's roads, by the way. Of Sanral's 22,000 roads. So coming to the question, government needs to decide how it's going to split up and pay for that 2.2 billion rand that it needs, or 2.4, 2.6, whatever it is, and right now at nearly 6 billion rand. So let's deal with now going forward. If you want to apportion that to a user pays, we have a fuel levy that is a user pay scheme. And remember, Gauteng's roads are South Africa's roads. So you can apply, as I showed you in the slide, you can apply a 15-cent increase to user pays, because I don't use Durban's roads, but I'm paying for them. And you can apply the rest through taxation. So one thing I can tell you, though, Mike, is to try and say the e-toll system is the user pay scheme. Well, somebody's got to convince society, not just ATA, COSATU, ANC, everybody, how the scheme is actually going to become an efficient user pay scheme, because it has 25% of people paying.
That's my point.
Yeah.
I want to know what percentage user pays.
I've just put it there. So put half into the fuel levy as a user pay scheme. It's a very efficient one. Administration costs 0, not 1.6 billion a year, and put the rest into taxation.
So 50-50.
Why not?
Yeah, Mike, this is I mean, if you're looking for an empirical answer, Mike, I think it's a bit more complex than that. I think South Africa is dealing with some very real socioeconomic issues. We have to build schools, we have to build houses, we have to build hospitals, and as a result of that, we can only stretch the money that we earn through taxes to a certain to a certain point. I think what I've seen on the GFIP is a very fair scheme where the user pays, but also where public transport is exempt. And that means that I don't know why COSATU is having a bun fight about this, because people are exempt from paying e-tolls. My view on it is that, Well, Mike, I can't give you a split. I can't say it's even 50-50, but what I can say is that I think government has accepted the user pay principle, and it needs to be fair and equitable. And it needs to provide for the socio-economic conditions that we are in South Africa.
Can I just...
something here in another way. I hear you on where the roads are, but if I go to London, London, how much road is the city of London of the whole UK? Also 1% or less.
Yeah, inner city surcharge, works well.
You have a congestion charge.
Yeah, works well.
So sometimes you have more tolls where there are more cars.
Yeah.
You would have more charges because there are more people. And
absolutely.
That is a cross-subsidization to others.
Absolutely.
But you wanted to say something?
No, I just want to say why Quinny can't go 50-50, because you can't half toll. You can't be half pregnant toll. You either toll or you don't. You can't reduce the rate. It makes the matter worse. So he's got to stick to the e-toll argument.
We have tolls on other roads.
Yeah.
Example,
So the reality there.
Well.
Yeah, reality is on those roads, there's a boom. You cannot go through that boom. It's 100% hit rate. You want to introduce a drive now, pay later scheme in South Africa, in this environment. Not in Hong Kong, not in Singapore. Yeah, you need to have the systems and the processes to get the compliance levels where it is. They never had that, they never will. So to continue to beat the drum on an issue that doesn't work, I can't understand why we keep saying user pays. But what, e-tolls, are you saying that e-tolls is the solution to Gauteng? Just tell me how you're going to do that. And it's, not everybody knows about ATA. This non-compliance is not because you're going to interview people. They don't all know. This is the public that are doing the issue. But that is the issue. That is the issue. So I've given my response. 15 cents the fuel levy, a user pay scheme, a very efficient one. Every time you start your car, you pay towards the use of roads. Everybody contributes. My fuel levy, by the way, 34% of the fuel levy coming from Gauteng is feeding. What other roads that I don't use? I don't mind that. I have no problem with my money being used to finance Durban's roads and Cape Town's roads and PE's roads. Well, you see, that's the issue. You saw how much the fuel levy increased by. Had they done the right thing 10 years ago, we wouldn't be sitting with this extra 16 billion rand. So to lay that blame on ATA is ludicrous. No, he did. He did. He says that our civil disobedience campaigns now run up a bill. I mean, that was bad.
No, but I certainly think they're part of it.
So is everybody who's not paying, the other 75% of people. And the ANC, by the way.
I mean, don't be a victim on this matter. Let's just deal with it.
I was told
I
by
like
Harry
we must
debate
debate.
about the future.
Yeah.
Am I correct?
Mike,
Can I just say one
correction,
Just
please?
hang on. You've had your...
Okay.
We've been 2 minutes.
I think it's really important to say that when we embark on this process, 4 workshops ago, we never said that e-toll is the solution. We never said that. And we have never been on this public forum saying that e-toll is the only solution. What we have done is we've said, let's invite conversation. Let's hear from the academics. Let's learn from the learned people in South Africa. Let's understand from government where we are and what solutions are available to us. Let's people have actually a voice and talk about it. We've never said that e-toll is the only solution. In fact, what we've done is we have laid ourselves bare here as ETC to invest in something that will result in a credible answer that we can give to government in a process that is participated on probably by 400 or 500 people in total, Mike. So I just want to correct that, to say that I'm not an advocate of e-toll. I'm an advocate of saying we as South Africans need to find solutions.
And
we can't be in the past. And what we also need to do is, e-toll is a solution of a number of solutions.
Okay, so we agree.
Just I can vouch that he didn't say let's pay e-tolls.
Okay,
There
well,
were a lot of people here that didn't
my
agree
goodness.
with e-tolls in
Yeah.
previous presentations.
Okay.
Just the one thing. And the other thing that I want to say is, if we just hook onto GFIP, we're also doing ourselves a disfavor.
Of course, yes.
Because, you know, when I go to Potchefstroom, I'm driving a very dangerous road these days. And whilst I recognize that 85% of SANRAL's roads, but even more of South Africa's roads, are not tolled. The only other tolling, I think, is in Cape Town, on Chapman's Peak by the municipality. I think
There's a couple of others. Sanral runs a lot of their own toll city.
no, I mean other than Sanwell
Yeah, okay.
collecting
A
tolls.
private one. One city.
But anyway, I'm saying let's look at the whole of South Africa. So Sanwell's been given national roads and some provincial roads. Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just ask this then, and that's my final question. Forget GFIP for a moment, both of you. In South Africa, we will need more road. We will need to maintain roads. We've got bad roads in many. Sorry, I'm doing everything wrong. I'm not talking into the mic, but that's because I'm nervous too. I think what we've got here is very simple. We need to find how do we get and how much road should we add. I'm not going to ask participants that question because I don't think we're here to that. But how do we get that and how much is that funding going to be? And I have my own view and so on. But I think if we look at the whole of South Africa, what is your view of what is the funding for roads in the next, say, 10 years, 20 years?
We have a problem, and I think as Kuni said, we have a serious problem. We have taxation that has been completely wasted. If we deal with the real issues and bring down the cost of road construction, which they can be, and I like the suggestion, there will be cheaper ways to build roads, and this is all going to add to it. So right now, you saw on Terry's slide, 46 billion rand is required in 2017, 2018 for road infrastructure, road funding. That was the amount that you put, I think, Terry, 46 billion. The fuel levy brings in 74 billion. I know that there's that there's maintenance still to be done. There's a lot to be done, and so if you just take the difference between what was on his slide and what is and what you collect just in the fuel levy. So we must continuously understand and acknowledge that taxation benefits society. Well, the slide said 45 billion. We're getting 75 from the fuel levy, but you need to know that roads and a country's economy runs through all its taxes, not just the fuel levy. So you have a tax pot which you have to use extremely wisely. And you've got fuel levy, you've got user pays mechanisms, which are long distance tolls, 100% compliance. You've got e-tolls, which is struggling, and you've got taxation and fuel levies, and you need to take a combination of all of that, Mike, and find the solution with society.
Can I give him a chance?
Yeah.
Thank you. How much do you think we need to spend on roads?
Well, I think, Mike, as I said before.
And I said more than
yes. Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm acutely aware of is that we have a certain income. We have taxed our people, are carrying a big burden. We have very specific socioeconomic problems in South Africa that aren't replicated anywhere else in the world. We have to build houses, we have to build schools, we have to educate people, we have to do a lot for health services. And therefore, you can't invest all the money in roads only, although roads are so crucial. And through the last 4 forums, it's been clear how roads actually facilitate growth and development and investment. So my view on it is that government needs to partner with private sector. And private sector shouldn't be held accountable when it is in partnership with government on these issues. I think there's a lot of room for more public-private partnerships to exist, for more roads to be tolled at the national level, which will alleviate
But the partnership between public and private sector must be transparent.
Absolutely transparent, and total agreement on this.
Okay, what do you think is the number that we would need, say, every year for the next 10 years?
Well, if I listen to you, we're saying we need 190 million upwards.
Billion.
Billion, sorry, billion.
Slight difference.
Yeah, billion. My view on it is to say that where we are right now at spending of below 50 billion, we probably needed at least a 30 to 40% increase on that, just to start dealing with some of the critical issues that we have.
Okay. I'm opening the floor for questions. Totally open. I see there's a hand. There's a hand. What we're going to do is we're going to take 2 or 3 questions at the same time, and then we're going to present it to the presenters. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Just to the people asking questions, Harry will bring you the mic, and you will talk into the mic so the audience outside here can hear. The other little thing is I don't want anything longer than a minute. I want 45 seconds, please. Thank you.
I'm John Barendrecht, transport economist from UNISA. User pay principle is very important, but there seems to be a little bit confusion when we talk about tolls. Are the tolls to prevent congestion, or are the tolls there to fund roads? Now, you know, when you look at Singapore or Hong Kong and those countries, it's to prevent congestion. And I think the tolls that we have implemented here is not necessarily to prevent congestion, it is more to fund roads. And I think the problem originated when the government decided they're going to take the dedicated fuel levy and use that as general tax revenue. So I do agree to a certain extent with OUTA that make the fuel levy a dedicated fund. Then basically when you put fuel in your car, you pay for your roads. And if you want to stop congestion in the cities, then maybe you can ask toll. That's basically what they did in London. They didn't introduce tolls there to fund the roads in London. They were trying to get the cars out of London and for people to use public transport. So also, if we build more roads all the time, it's a problem. So that's also a problem. If you get funds for roads, we need public transport. Thank you.
Johan Joubert, University of Pretoria. If I look at the independent literature and not that is produced by the proponents of either against or pro-toll, the literature very clearly suggests that fuel tax is more regressive. And then it's not even taking into account the higher price of goods that the poor will actually pay. So we've got this inequality thing that does not seem to be taken into account, which I would like to hear your opinions about, because we really need to take that. That's a separate objective that we have to pursue as we actually move forward. I've got one question though. When I heard a different side of the argument today that I really appreciate, that it seems that there's a very strong idea that the pushback is very much against ministers and SANRAL not being or being kept accountable for what they were supposed to do in terms of managing it. And I can understand the pushback. But if we were to move forward, would it be a fair assumption to then say that OUTA would like to also see their members be held accountable for paying if they actually use the roads? Because I do agree that lawlessness is not something that we can perpetuate.
Agreed.
So if we say, not on my watch, then we actually have to do that for everybody that actually then do use the roads, especially if you agree that 50-50 is the split between user charge and tax. Could you comment?
There's one more question from there, and then we'll allow, and then next round, see Jack's already got his hand up, and so on. We're going to make 2-3 rounds, so don't worry, we'll get to you. I'll see you in the second round, okay?
So just one maybe slightly off-center question. There's pretty good research around social movements, the rising of social movements against infrastructure projects, that mostly those are aligned more around the opportunity that that project creates for resistance than the actual impact that that project has in communities. So I was interested in the two panelists just responding to what extent the GFIP toll debate is an opportunity to mobilize all sorts of other ills and frustrations with government, and to what extent you think it is only around specifics of this specific abuse of this specific project.
Thank you for the short question. I would just like to say, just on the fuel tax not being a dedicated fund, that has nothing to do, that was in the end of the 80s, am I right? That was under the National Party rule. I think in 87 or so, when I was still somewhere younger. But anyway, let's just leave that, so don't blame that one on this government.
So, am I responding? Yes. Okay, so
maybe we should ask, do you want to respond first?
Thank you. So I would say the first response to John would be that what we have ascertained through the last 4 sessions is that the fuel levy is a diminishing fund, and I think there's ample evidence for it. So the fuel levy might work next year, it might work the year thereafter, but what happens post that? So what happens over the next 20 years, where we know that cars are going to become even more fuel efficient? There's also clear evidence that we punish people that cannot afford new technology. We punish them more. So I'm not sure exactly how that is an equitable solution. I think, Johan, your question on keeping people accountable, we fundamentally agree that what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And my view is that if you want to hold people accountable for breaking the law, and I totally support that, then I would also say that we have to be very careful about promoting breaking the law. I think the fuel tax we know is a regressive tax. We know that it punishes the poor. And I think that's the beauty of not the GFIP, but a similar solution, because the poor are not. They are exempt. Public transport is exempt. So people using taxis and the like will be exempt from it. And then I think the last question around the social movement. We've done detailed studies about what happens in the mind of a road user in Gauteng. And we know that it starts with people being disillusioned with government. We know that this is an easy way of withholding tax. So it's a bit of a kind of a tax revolt almost, so to speak. But what we have also seen is we've seen organizations like OTA at this point in time using that for 18,000 users to fund the rest of their projects. So there's a very opportunistic approach in using these projects to that extent.
Yeah, no, look, I must just point out it's not 18,000 Kuni, it's closer to 30,000. We have massive support for the work we do, and I want to get to the question asked about, is this an opportunity? Is this how civil action movements were born? Well, for the first 3 years, I resigned from business to do this at my cost with 2 other people. And we ran up massive legal bills, and we've learnt a lot about that. I would want nothing more to go back to work. I don't have shares in ARTA. This is not a populist issue. What we were asked to do is go beyond the e-toll fight, because we had put up quite an effective process in place to start challenging government. And that's what happened. So ARTA went beyond e-tolls. 117 projects that we're working on, holding people accountable, dealing with corruption. Big, serious cases, saving this country billions of rands. E-tolls was an irrational policy, and it was 5 business organizations that got together to challenge this. And it was a rightful challenge. Unjust laws and irrational laws deserve the treatment they get, just as the Group Areas Act gave rise to the biggest civil disobedience campaign. You can have a democratic government that gets it wrong. And when government gets it wrong and they don't listen, the last resort is civil disobedience. And unfortunately, that is the issue that has worked here. It doesn't make me a lawless person. I believe in paying taxes and that, but I will not be, and many people agree with that, we will not be bullied and pushed into a space where we have to overpay grossly for infrastructure. And it is gross, folks. You need to look at those figures. It is not acceptable to us. To come back to, yes, this is not about us just beating a drum and trying to hold the past accountable. This is about exposing the poor leadership, the very, very poor decisions that were made. And it's so sad that we now sit with this massive debt, because we have to dig ourselves out of this hole. We've got so much to do, let alone, I mean, Eskom's problems are massive. This is very small compared to that. And they're finding a solution, by the way, for Eskom's debt. This is minor in the greater scheme of things. So I think we can get through this and we'll find the funds. But this is not just about us saying, yeah, well, they were out of line. We know we have to move forward, but we also have to get answers. Why did that happen? Why did road constructions go up 4-fold? Why did that happen? Because that's exactly what happened for GFIP. Why is it when you go and look in data build to find the GFIP project, it's nowhere to be seen, but all other SANRAL's projects are there? Why are they hiding this information? And I'll tell you now another issue around road funding solutions. You've got 3 concessionaires, very advanced. They give 80 million rand between them to SANRAL per annum. We want transparency, and I'm glad that Kuni said we need transparency. When we ask for the information on the 3 concessionaires, and we're entitled to it, by the way, as society, because they're providing a service to us, they don't want to give that information. We want to know how much they're earning, because the contracts are very clear. Over a reasonable profit needs to come back to SANRAL. We don't see that happening. So when we ask our state-owned institution whose salaries we pay, can we have that information, and they say no, what goes through our minds?
Wayne, can you just, who are these concessionaires? Who are they?
2 billion rand, 3 billion rand a year coming back from that to fund this problem. But we won't know because they don't want to tell us. The 3 concessionaires are N3TC, Track and Bakwena. And we've asked for this information.
People can't hear me, so I need that mic. And I will take questions from Jack van der Merwe, that gentleman over there, and then I have room for a third from a man that had a thing about the solution. Okay. And please keep the questions short within a minute.
My name is Jack van der Merwe. What I'd like to know, we're in this room trying to find we're in this room to try and find a solution on funding. But the solution I get here is get my neighbor to pay. But my neighbor hasn't even told about it. If we want to use fuel levy, do we have treasury in here that says what they are doing with fuel levy? Because fuel levy is a tax.
Yeah.
And if you use it for something else, you'll have to get more taxes. So one is being dishonest to say, you know, just put 26 cents per litre and you'll pay Gauteng. Then Cape Town will say put 50 cents. Then in the end we'll put up 6 rand. So all that I'm saying is you can't have a solution where the man who must make the solution is your neighbor and he's not in this room. So what I want, and you know, the whole argument about e-tolls is that it was a corrupt system. So I want OTA to come up and say, we support the user pay principle, we support tolling if it is done correctly and it's done transparently. Because that's actually what you have to do.
Yes.
You have to give a message to the people out there to say that your negativity is around the process and not around tolling.
So, good question. I'll answer that.
I'll take the mic here. I'm just going to partly for the people online repeat the basis of the question that Jack van der Merwe wants to know about would Alta accept if it was not corrupt and where we are now, and that the other point being that fuel tax is a tax, not a user pays situation. All right, I'm taking it to this gentleman. Please, guys that are asking the question, we have to talk loud or quite close to the mic, apparently.
Thanks very much. My name is Landio Matlango. I'm an economist with actually NAFCOC. I think the point has been made here. Maybe one should echo it. I think there still need to be some kind of clarification as to the principle of user pay and the instrument of actually e-toll. But my question was just going to be on the way forward, and I know it's quite premature to do that. Clearly, we have a system where, according to Outer, has failed, but e-toll collection, ETC is still actually standing. And now you have a situation whereby now you've got clearly a backlog and a debt, which means basically we've got a double whammy in terms of that's what needs to be collected. Can I maybe just, I know you may have said this, can I understand how then do we get out of this? And that's a question that is to both of you.
Thank you very much. Very good question. I'm now going to the gentleman who had the road idea just now, who is going to, I'm making a joke now, but who was going to put 3 cardboards down and we're going to have another road. I'm kidding. Here, just please. Okay, can you just talk close to the mic or loud?
Sorry. I didn't introduce myself earlier on. My name is Ghana Nambia. I'm currently the CEO of a company called International Road Solutions. How appropriate, number one. And secondly, I'm an ex-corporate banker. So my question to you, Connie, is, you made a very bold statement. Government cannot fund the roads on its own. I want to know why. And a very quick comment is that I think we are really missing the point here. You know, we have certain scenarios that's of the past that are biting us now that we need to solve. Then we need to take the present situation, do and go forward with it in terms of road funding for the future. Thank you.
We have another question from the online. I've just given it to Wayne because it's specifically to address to Wayne. It's about the prospects of, can I just read the question for those online?
Yeah, happy to answer.
For Wayne from Vululami, what are the prospects for fuel levy funding in an environment where vehicle efficiency is improving and adaptation of electronic cars is imminent? Can I just say one thing we understand about the infrastructure spend of government? At the moment, or not at the moment, but in a year or two ago, and it's been declining most of the time, it was about 3.2% of GDP. To put that into context, government is spending 14% of GDP on its salary bill. So literally our total infrastructure spend on dams, water, road, etc. is a quarter, roughly speaking, of what we spend on salaries. Just so that you know, and that's why we're not getting the outcome. So sometimes it's not the protagonist here, but somewhere else. Thank you. I'm going to give Wayne the first thing. And then
I think just to get back to Jack, you know, and it comes up quite often, and it came up also over here with this clarity on this user pays scheme. So let's acknowledge fuel levies user pays, tolling as user pays, the chips that people can put in cars that measure the exact use of your road when you get to be able to administer that. That's great technology. And we must probably use it if we can administer it properly. And as I think Mike was saying, you can take photos of and geolocate where you are. I mean, we've got to try and work out whether that's going to work. I'm on record as saying, folks, that I'd be the first person to put an e-tag in my car and pay e-tolls if the process is and was transparent. Because if it was at the time, and we could ask the tough questions of government as to why they are spending 17.9 billion when that doesn't make sense, and scrutinize that and hold them to account, and then look at the toll collection contracts and be part of that decision. And if the costs had have come right down where it made sense and it was transparent, well, let me tell you, I'd be the first person to do so. More so if that money was not used for road infrastructure upgrading, but to introduce public sector integrated public transport. Because as Enrico Penalosa said in Bogota when he was developing the road and dealing with the congestion in that city, he said it's not about poor people driving to work in cars, but it's about rich people using public transport. And I'd be happy to take a bus to work or two buses if it's reliable and safe, but it isn't. And so you see in these graphs that were presented, the road use and the vehicles have been escalating purely because of that. There is no solution yet. And sadly, government has let us down in that regard. We need integrated public transport so that we can deal with congestion, not just by building wider roads. So that's the issue, and I can tell you now that if that was the case, I'd put my e-tag on and be proud of it and pay for those roads so that I have other alternatives and other options. Unfortunately, we don't in this country, and we have to now deal and grapple with that backlog as well. On this question here, sorry, there was another element to the user pays and the debt. How do we get out of it? Well, I think Kuni's also touched on it. We've got massive debt in this country. I don't have the answer. I think Treasury's got a big headache here. The last 10 years have seen gross waste of taxpayers' money and costs that have escalated through the roof. So we have a big hole to get out of. I mean, just look at Eskom. Now, government is finding the money to bail out at 28 billion rand a year for 23 for the next 10 years. If we have to put in another 3 billion for this year, we have to get rid of certain assets such as SAA. I mean, there's where the Free Market Foundation, this argument is extremely strong. It works very well if you're in a competitive environment. Unfortunately, roads is not about should I take a SANRAL road or a non-SANRAL road. You know, we've got to not make those decisions. We've got to get going. So we need to settle this debt. all of us collectively. It is our problem, and we'll deal with that. Now, this issue that keeps coming up about cars getting more and more efficient, of course they're going to. Why do you think the fuel levy's gone up so much? So what you do as a government, you adjust your taxation to suit the environment and situation that you find yourself in. And if cars get more efficient, you have to find taxes in other ways. If in 30, 40 years' time, it's completely electric cars, I can tell you now, government will find a solution to deal with its transport issues. It has to. It can't just sit here and say, well, we're going to we're going to charge a fuel levy, and there is no fuel levy to charge. So they will find solutions. It might find its way as an electric levy.
Carbon
but
tax.
That's also going to be a problem. Yeah, carbon tax. There are many other ways. We don't have the answers right now. But right now, while there is a massive fuel levy, and 10 years ago they made the decision, guys, we would have solved the debt already. That was not our decision. It's a sad situation that we have leadership that cannot think and just doesn't apply its mind and all the alternatives. It had one thing in mind with e-tolls, how much money it could take out of the system, unfairly.
Got you?
Well,
I think you don't need to answer the fourth question because you don't.
Yeah, agreed. But I do think I want to respond to what the couple of jabs that Wayne has been giving out this afternoon. The one is, Wayne, you keep on referring to a corrupt tender process. Okay. The Auditor General and the Public Protector cleared Sunroll and ETC from any corruption. And by the way, ETC was the lowest tenderer. And by the way, this tolling system that we're running on is running at 37.1 cents per kilometer. It's the cheapest tolling system in South Africa by orders of magnitude.
It's not working.
It's not working because we've
Because of
got...
us.
Yes, exactly.
Come on. You are crazy.
Well,
okay.
Watch out,
No,
Wayne.
we'll take
Watch out.
we'll
I
take
think
the blame.
I think the other point that I want to make is, so Wayne has now admitted that there's no way forward. There is actually a way forward. Let me explain what our vision is. I think that the historic debt that road users have built up has become a stumbling block for them. So people look at the historic debt and they say, I've got a 20,000 Rand bill, please take me to court because I cannot afford to pay it. We have made proposals to government to say, we need to find a way for people to settle their historic debt without burdening them financially. How can we do that? Well, one example is to say that if we allow road users to become compliant today, and for every year that they're compliant, we write off 20% of their historic debt. What happens to the system? Immediately the system starts working, compliance levels go up, we are able to fund phase 2 of this project, we are able to build new jobs, create new infrastructure, create new investment, and at the same time we make sure that people start becoming compliant. So there are solutions. I honestly believe that we do need to think a bit laterally around this, and we can't be stuck in the past. We actually have to find innovative solutions around how we address this thing. It would be a shame this afternoon if you walk out of here and you think that there's no solution, and that the only solution is actually the fuel levy. It would be an absolute shame.
I didn't say that. Let me just correct you there. I did provide a solution, which I showed you 47 billion Rand, that's where it is, to go and renegotiate the bonds with PIC, and they will, and the PIC, by the way, is linked to government. They're not going to shoot government in the foot. We can find a solution. But what you're asking the public to do, Kuni, is to perpetuate a serious issue.
Wayne, luckily you are not the guy that decides on the laws of this country, because your norms and values do not agree with mine.
Well, okay, I'm happy to accept that.
And you cannot decide which laws to follow and which laws you don't follow.
I will decide not to follow this law.
To keep it a bit calm, can you do it through me?
Yeah.
Fight with me
So
first.
can I just finish
And I
my
just wanted to ask you, sir, is your question answered? Is your... Not yet. Okay.
So,
well, I understood your question. I understood your question to say, what is the way forward? I think the way forward for us is we have to work together. That is the fundamental point of departure. The history is the history. We cannot undo this. But what we have to understand today is with regards whatever we have in the history, we actually have to move forward. So we still have to find solutions. And there's a lot of clever people around this room, a lot more clever than me, that are able to look at these solutions and say, can it actually work, yes or no? I am not advocating e-tolls per se. I am saying that it is very clear from even the data that Mike presented today, that we can only stretch our budget that far. And if we take the fuel levy, like Jack indicated, and we just use it for roads, where is the money going to come from to pay for the gap that it leaves, the hole that it leaves? Because we still have this gap.
Yeah.
We have to work with the private sector. We have to get the private sector on board, and we have to start helping to finance these projects.
I'm happy with that.
Okay, we got people a little bit more happy. I'm taking a last round of questions. I see Terry over here. Just by show of hands if you want to ask a question. Is that a question over there? It's two. Terry, you first.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn a statement into a question. Do you agree with the following concern I have? I mentioned in my talk that the biggest problem by far is growth. It seems to me that, and with respect to everybody here, including myself in the room, that talking about road funding is really like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic.
Exactly.
We've got, by far the worst culprit of all is Eskom. I happen to know a little bit about it. They've got 48,000 employees. Their own chairman says they shouldn't have more than 30,000.
Yeah.
So you take that and you include SAA, you include the roads, you include the NHI, where they're going to find more money to spend there. This country has gone insane.
Yeah,
There's no question about it. And unless we put our efforts into trying to get the government, A, to reduce costs, and B, to introduce growth policies, we're going to go nowhere.
Okay.
And so I would say to you, if you're going to talk about road funding, please spend some of your time telling the government to focus on growth.
Exactly.
7 or 8% growth rate is what we should be getting as a minimum if we were a properly run country. Thanks.
Looks like that question has a lot of agreement. I'm going to this gentleman at the back here and just take a question. And then if there's one final question from, okay, that's Ray.
Good afternoon, Alex Powell. This might seem like a very narrow-minded question, but it's from the point of view of those who have been compliant year in and year out and year in and year out. And let's just imagine that you get us up to 100% compliance with all these goodwill writing off of debts. Will the same benefits ever be rolled out to those who have been paying over the years?
Darted.
I think that's called unscrambling an egg.
Thank you, Mike. Question to Kuni Rachels here. You've mentioned that you're consulting here and there's a lot of learned people around the floor. What is ETC going to do? Are you the custodian of going back to government with all these suggestions so that we have a holistic plan and we present that to public? Because I believe if the public sees the practical and transport economic solutions, that people will start to support it and buy in. So, and by the way, that should have been done. So maybe it was, but that's not the question. What will ETC do now to get this into public space that we can move all in the right directions?
That was the last question. We'll start with Kuni because it was aimed at him. And then we'll give both people to answer these questions.
So I'll start, Ray, with you. Certainly, when we embarked on this strategy or this approach to have open debate, the intent was always that we collate this data, we collate this research that was done, and that we present to government and the public in a clear, structured way what are the options available to them. I think this has always been the starting point. The starting point for us has been to say, so what are the options? Let's talk about those options. Let's look at the analysis of it and now present, now that we have this and we've got really a fantastic research and data available, we will make that available to government, and we will certainly, at ETC's own cost, we will continue to drive this and create awareness with road users. I think the other question around what happens to people that have been compliant? Certainly, that's also in our model. So in our model, what we are propagating is to say that for every year that you've been compliant, you'll get a year at 40% discount. So, and if you look at that model, it actually works very well. So definitely, we need to reward our citizens that have been compliant, that have been law-abiding. And then I think, Terry, the question that you asked, growth, certainly. But how do you attract growth? You create growth by attracting investment. You attract investment by creating policy certainty. You do not attract investment when you propagate a lawless society. You do not attract investment when you continue to tell the world that certain of the laws that we follow in this country is important and certain of the laws that we follow are irrational, and so we just decide to ignore it. And that is what's important. Fundamentally, I support growth. Growth is the only thing that will make this thing work. If we have phase 2, and that's why we have to deal with the debt. The historic debt, I think, is a mammoth issue and an obstacle for people. The moment that people start paying and they realize that the cap is 277 Rand per month, no matter how far you travel on the GFIP, then the model starts working, then the investment starts working, because where Wayne's model is fundamentally flawed is he's just talking about the historic debt. He's not talking about the money that needs to be raised for phase 2 and phase 3, the 158 kilometers of brand new road that needs to be built between Johannesburg and Pretoria. He's not talking about that. That's not even part of his maths. And that is the fundamental flaw that OTA's got in all their modeling.
Well, I'll respond to that. So, you know, growth does attract investment, but what fundamentally has to happen is you've got to deal with corruption in this country. And that's the problem. When we deal with that, when we bring the costs of tolling roads, of building roads and infrastructure down to where it should be, you will get a lot more investment. We'll get the growth. We'll be able to finance all of this, including the additional roads, which we have said we have to pay for and have to build. It's not outside of our model. It's not outside of our thinking. We understand that that has to happen. So, you know, to go back to clawing back discounts, I'd love to hear what Kuni's plan is. But the problem is that by offering carrots, and they've done this all along, by offering a carrot of, well, we'll be able to write off your debt over the next 5 years if you become compliant today, you perpetuate an evil, badly designed, irrational system that doesn't work. So let me just explain that, because all you're going to do is perpetuate this need for, and I showed you the figures, a 1.6 billion rand, which will go up, by the way, when they go out to retender. There's inflation and that didn't require 1 billion rand of that. They've shown it. They can run the system on 643 million. So what were they going to do with the 1 billion rand? And I said it earlier on in response to Jack's questions. Be transparent. Let's sort this out together. Let's go and find the money, because we have to. We're not saying we don't want to pay for it. We have to find the funds. But if you're not going to involve civil society in this decision making, if you're not going to be transparent, you're not going to get the support of the public. So you can go along, Kuni, and offer all the carrots, but it's a principal issue. This scheme has failed under its current contract. Scrap it, let's get the funds, and let's deal with e-tolling. Again, let's do it properly. Let's have to wipe out the unfortunate debt that they've created for us, and we'll fix this problem together. We have provided solutions and ideas. You saw the fuel levy. If you just put it up by 26 cents now, which is already in the system. But yes, our government has squandered so much money. I think after the elections, we're going to go forward with a lot of austerity, with a lot of cost reduction, stuff that's going to stimulate the economy. We're going to grow. We're going to be able to invest in our roads, invest in our schools and infrastructure. I'm so committed to this country and its future. But know one thing. I'm a law-abiding citizen, and I will pay all my taxes. But introduce irrational laws that don't make sense, not just to me, but to 75% of the road users. If we don't pay, we have a right to stand our ground. We cannot wait to deal with this matter in court. They've now had to put it on hold because Sanral went and had an urgent a board meeting that stopped debt collection, that shot them in the foot, because that was the argument about the Armageddon, fiscal Armageddon. It's going mad at the moment, guys. We need to move on, and I think if you continue to flog a dead horse, you will not get civil society's support.
Okay, I think that's well done, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Do you want to say anything? Not much,
no.
Hopefully. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, that's it. You're going to get a prize-giving ceremony now, and you better give all your cards into that box so you can win a wireless speaker and replay the whole thing on YouTube and see what mistakes I made. Or you can just give your stickers. Thank you. I think I should have got you to shake hands. I think that's what I did wrong. There goes Wayne and Kuni, go and shake hands.
Yes.
I think this is the first this is the first step, I think, in a good debate. And yes, they're not necessarily friends, but at least people are talking. I thank you for coming. I'll hand back over to Harry.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mike. Can we give Mike a good hand for moderating? Ladies and gents, Jody is busy there with a box. Kindly have your business card in there. Should you not have a business card, then remove the paper from the plastic. Remove the paper from the plastic. And you put the paper in there. You can do that. And remember, on this stage, ladies and gents, it's now our time to say goodbye to our online viewers. So thank you very much for following us. We're looking forward to the next Transport Forum, which will also be streamed live, and that will be on the 16th of May. It's all about digitization towards the smart city, and that will be hosted by Huawei in Woodmead. So thank you very much for following us and saying goodbye to the online users. Thank you very much.